Let me get that handsome chin into the shot, please, Dan. Want to make sure your
My chin?
chin's
Here,
yeah, when you're
let me just, there we go.
yeah. Look, you got the
Nice.
jersey on and everything. Let's rock it.
Yeah,
It
man, we're
is.
ready.
We are ready. And you know why? Because it is May 31st, 2024, and welcome to Covering Our Bases. From Mets to Mariners, we break down baseball's biggest highlights and headlines with unique context from every MLB team's perspective. Now, as we cover our bases, we aim to educate, entertain, and engage the average baseball fan who just doesn't have the time to follow the other 29 teams around the league. Expect the fun storylines, patterns, predictions, and pageantry of Major League Baseball to be present at all times. He's NL Dan Harrow, I'm AL Warren Sprague, and Dan, the fireworks have gone off. It's a new day in Major League Baseball. Yes, it is. Angel Hernandez, the infamously controversial Major League Baseball umpire, notorious for some of the most memorable blown calls across his 33-year career, has retired effective immediately. Whew! After his second attempt to sue Major League Baseball for racial discrimination goes up in smoke. Guys, this is huge. Why now for this outcome of his career, Dan? Angel Hernandez, that is. And what do you feel about this development? Is his legacy as a baseball umpire, going to be strong as years move on? It seems like this is one of the most controversial figures in Major League Baseball history. Are you happy to see him go? Let's talk Angel Hernandez at last.
Yeah, so I feel like this really took a point a couple of years ago after Joe West retired, because Joe West really probably held that top stable as the most experienced and the most questionable call-wise umpire. And after he retired, Angel Hernandez kind of inherited that throne, and he became the focus. And he, like you mentioned, he's had a history of questionable calls in the past, but not having another one like Joe West in the media the last couple of years, Angel's just taken the brunt of all the abuse and all of kind of the vocal majority or vocal minority of fans who are screaming for his head, right?
And you yourself were inspired to do a whole segment in our conversations based around bad calls from Angel Hernandez, right? Dissecting his umpire cards and exposing his poor decisions. And sometimes, to be honest with you, some racial discrimination coming from him himself. So yeah, just a weird, a controversial guy to say the least, but keep going.
Yeah, you're right. I've tried to dig into his numbers a little bit before, and part of the reason he sued the league was because he was being denied time in the playoffs and World Series appearances. But those were all decisions that were based off of his performance in the seasons. So he can't really complain any more than his own stats. So I took the opportunity, like, let's look at his stats. Let's try and be a little bit impartial about it now that he's officially done. He's not even coming back for a last game where he's just like, I'm out of here. He ended up
Sayonara.
he ended up with an accuracy rating of 91.9%, which ranks in the 27th percentile for
Oh,
umpires, which is
okay.
pretty bad.
I was
Yeah,
going to say, that sounds not as bad as I thought it would be,
right.
actually.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect 100% from these guys, but just far as the average of umpires, like below 90 is virtually unheard of, probably not major league level. So to be that low is pretty bad. And his consistency, so calling balls and strikes for each team consistently, is at a 92.7%, which is 13th percentile. Warren, like the numbers
Yeah.
you see below this are rookies or umps that are still like being just got promoted or getting used to a faster speed game,
Man.
not like this over such a long career. So the numbers
Mhm.
support that Angel didn't really impress us along the way, right? But I think everybody remembers the Wyatt Langford bat earlier this year, Warren.
Yeah.
That was a flashpoint in a lot of ways. It
Right.
reignited the argument. We started talking about robot umps again.
Yep.
Rob Manfred came out and said that they weren't progressing fast enough in the minor leagues. We probably wouldn't see them next year. So people just continued to get more and more frustrated. I think you asked why now. What triggered this for Angel seemed to be his family, his
Oh.
daughter, his children, his wife. They started to see a lot more of this, the social media attacks and just him
Whoa.
basically being thrown under the bus for everything, which you never want to see. And I think he
No.
reached a point where he was like, why would I even want to finish the season dealing with this?
Right.
Obviously he's not going to change his ways. Like we've talked about, he's never been admitted that he's like bad at his job or anything, he wouldn't. So we
Right.
can't expect him to get better the rest of the year. So he knew this abuse would just continue. So he talked to baseball and was like, I want to negotiate a severance package and I want to be done right now. And I think baseball was like, you know what? We haven't had a lot of wins this year between the uniforms and all these other controversies that have been stringing up, the pitching injuries and all this, all these
Yeah.
combative instances with the Players Association. I think they were just like, you know what? Sure, we'll help you. We'll do whatever
Yeah.
it takes to get you off the field. And I think that's where it ends. So as far as legacy, unfortunately, his legacy will be that Wyatt Langford at bat. It will be remembered for all these poor calls. We can see that it's not the entirety of Angel's career. He called good games sometimes. Every single
Times.
umpire and player who's interacted with him has said he's a good guy. He's a nice guy. He's not
Yeah.
intentionally unfair. So it's unfortunate that he'll be remembered for those poor spots, but it does seem like that will be the legacy of the last of the old guard, Warren Angel Hernandez.
Oh man, a new era. I'm excited for that. Let it happen. Let's though we're seeing plenty of blown calls all over the umpire staffs. I mean, I can't tell you how many outside balls seem to be strikes this year. That seems to be the overall theme in my mind. So there's lots of work to be done. And what blows my mind about this is that it was just weeks ago. I remember seeing an Angel Hernandez meme or quote where he says, "You can't fire me." You know, he's just defiant in the face of all this controversy ongoing, right? None of this is new really for him. And then now we fast forward 2 weeks and he's like, actually, my hat is off. Goodbye, everyone.
I'm
Like,
done.
yeah. I want to talk about like I think it was CC Sabathia who posted of the Porky Pig. That's all, folks. In reaction to that, and, you know, there were lots of CC Sabathia versus Angel Hernandez moments in postseason play that really stand out in many's minds. So you have to think the players seem to be celebrating this departure. But like we said, lots of work to do. If you guys have some really subliminal and awesome Angel Hernandez umpire examples you want to throw at us, I still have interest in breaking down umpire cards more regularly, Dan, so we can maybe set up a different stream of content on our channel. If you guys agree that guys like Angel Hernandez or some of the other umpires out there need to have a spotlight put on them for their bad or sometimes fantastic game calling, throw us some ideas in the comments of umpires or games that could really be fun to dig into, because the meta of the game is always worth dissecting for Dan and I. And he could teach me a lot about those umpire cards. So let's talk about it. It'd be fun. But we'll move on from umpiring for today. We've got a 30-team breakdown and each team enjoying about, 5 to 7 games for us to chat about. I want to say this early for those of you who do tune out at some point, which is understandable. We talk forever. We do want to point out we will have a delayed release of our show next week as well. We maybe allow 10 games to pass for each team. We can have a little bit more of a fun clip in our revolvers, so to speak, to shoot out with those anti-rankings. So be ready for a little bit of a delayed show next week, and we thank you guys for tuning in and keeping an eye out for the release of that. But we've been doing this week in and week out, and no one is volunteering this dope name, right, for our anti-rankings. We're going to keep rocking that motif. And you may notice I'm rocking a motif today. Finally found a way, guys, if you're watching on YouTube, to notice that I'm wearing my Mariners hat that is blazoned in red. I'm seeing red a little bit today, and even though we had not the worst week, Dan's going to ask me about it a little bit later when we do talk Mariner baseball. But I'm also rocking some CM Chicago-made material because Chicago is also seeing red this week, Dan. And as we jump into our rankings, I'm just going to say it, guys. We have our first black hole team this week. The first time we've seen a team fail to earn a win for the entirety of the separation from last week's coverage to this week. So they absolutely mandatorily need to be the first team I discuss. We're not even going to have the fun game of like Dan's Mets being worse than my Mariners. We already know I get to go first, but 30 has to be. There's no discussing it. I'll get a draft pick for number 29 after this because this team is just objectively the worst. It's the Chicago White Sox. Where, Yeah,
It
man,
sure
guy,
is, Warren,
they
man.
are the worst team in baseball, Dan. And
Yeah.
we know this. We're not going to spend too much time reminding everybody about how much we get to shred this team. You know, your Eric Fetties and your Garrett Crochets are always say positively week in and week out about this group. They went 0-7 this week. They dropped 4 to Baltimore, predictably. But then they couldn't even muster a win against the Toronto Blue Jays, who have been safeguarding the meh segment of our rankings the entirety of the season. So, without a single spark of something to look forward to, Chicago White Sox have to be in the garbage bin. Why, Dan? Why can't they get a win?
So this was a little bit of a tougher schedule. Two pretty strong offensive teams in Baltimore and Toronto. But yeah, I think all of the injuries that they have, Moncada, Stassi, Jimenez, and Robert Jr. are all still hurt. It's just
Ah,
Tommy Pham, Warren. He's still working his way up. He's getting his batting average closer to 300, but he can't do it all himself. Like Mike Clevenger hit the IL, and they called up Jake Woodford to fill in for him, and he really struggled. So there's not a lot going right for Chicago right now. The one thing I'm seeing that's kind of encouraging, Warren, is they're working on small ball. At least every player on the team has at
ah,
least one stolen base, which is actually pretty encouraging. But I think that's
mhm.
what you have to do when you know you need to steal 2 or 3 bags after getting a single just to get home, because probably not a lot of guys hitting behind you. So it's rough sailing for Chicago right now. And I don't know if they're going to come out of it anytime soon, man.
No, it's going to take years. It's going to take years, and we know that. They need to dump their assets that they have, that they're willing to part with, that aren't young enough or under team control long enough to justify keeping them in the pool. It's just depressing, of course, because the Chicago White Sox are an old team and a proud team, and even though they're historically not one of the more successful ones, I mean, there's a whole south side of Chicago praying for it to get better, and it's obviously with the couple stars they can put on the field when everybody's healthy, your Eloy Jimenez's and more importantly your Luis Robert Jr. You well you that's it. That's it. That's
Yeah.
it. Okay? Like there's nothing happening here. And you can see that. I, as a Seattle fan, am eyeing hot-hitting Tommy Pham really closely because I'm in dire need of an outfielder who consistently makes
Mhm.
contact. Thank you very much. Feed me some Tommy Pham as soon as humanly possible. How long is a guy who's that hot going to remain on a team that's that trash? I'm sure it's not like probably by the end of June. Well, it has to be. Trade deadline's coming. Ha 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 ha. Ha. So Tommy Pham's going to be on the move soon, and let's hope it's to a team that will be really grateful, right, for the spark plug like mentality his offense has brought to the White Sox. He's almost single handedly been responsible for some of those bright spots that we've seen from this team. So thanks, Tommy Pham. Come on down to a team that wants to win and is somehow not able to. As much as we want. But yeah, that's it. Black hole, right? Everybody's getting sucked into the center of the Chicago White Sox terrible play right at the moment. And we're prying ourselves away from it so we could talk about the 29th team, which, Dan, this is now my first official draft pick. Funny enough, that means I get to talk about team number 1 this week.
Yeah, it
Which should
does.
be it should be really interesting, guys. We don't have any perfect teams this week. So all of
Nope.
those teams can be anywhere on our countdown. And there are some great teams that will be talked about sooner in our conversation than ever before in some cases because they had really bad weeks. You know who's coming, but you probably didn't expect this to be coming. Yes, the Windy City woes continue because the 29th team, the first draft pick for me to discuss this week, is the other Chicago made mediocrity. Yes, at 1-5, the Chicago Cubs are next. They're just that disappointing for this week, Dan. Going 1-5 when you have the rotation you have, when you have the offense that you have on paper. I think everybody knows the Chicago Cubs have yet to show us their best. Unless, of course, you can count Shota Umanga's amazing start as their best, which you could certainly argue. But now that has been altered by the offensive play we saw from Milwaukee against him just the other day, Chicago just is left reeling at 1-5 from a really tough week overall. And that's both Chicago teams, guys, starting off our countdown. You hate to see it. You have to expect the Cubs will be okay. At least I do. I really do. But for now, they need to be near the basement of our rankings. How do you feel about watching Chicago be so bad this week, Dan?
Surprising, dude. I mean, it's sad first of all to have both Chicago teams in the bottom two spots. Man, that's rough.
Well,
That's real rough.
Windy City woes, for
Yeah,
sure, for sure.
absolutely. But the offense has just gone ice cold, like resembling the White Sox. I mean, ever since
Ooh.
Suzuki has come back from the IL, he just hasn't seemed to really find it. And Bellinger just hasn't been consistent. He's popping off, still hitting home runs here and there, but just not as consistent as they'd like. And even
Mm-hmm.
Imanaga, Warren, took his first
Mm-hmm.
loss of the season. The cracks starting to show some cracks. His ERA is over 1 now. So Ranger Suarez
Mm-hmm.
inherits the lead. But yeah, I think you're right to have Chicago down here. I think we called them out last week for their struggles in divisional matchups. And
Yeah.
these are two divisional matchups they absolutely had to win, and they couldn't. And they have another divisional matchup coming up next, and they just continue to prove that if they're not going to win the games in division, it's not going to matter.
That 4-game set with Milwaukee was circled on my calendar as absolute must-watch baseball this weekend, and it didn't disappoint. These are obviously two National League heavyweights going swing for swing against each other, but Chicago came out on the losing end of 3 of 4 of those contests, excuse me, and that is an underwhelming result because Milwaukee is stumbling with their pitching, right at the moment, and they're being carried by those bats. And Chicago's got one of the most exciting lineups in their division, right? We've talked or rotations, I should say, rotations. We've got Javier Assad, we've got Jameson Taillon, we've got Justin Steele, and we've got Shota Imanaga. And oh, right, I think Leiter Jr. is their fifth, and he got a lot of work this week. Got a little overexposed, I would say. Those 5 guys should be enough to be really stable in this division, and it will probably prove to be still. Just this week was the wrong time for them to flounder. That series with Milwaukee was extremely important, and they botched a lot of it. But you come on, Dan, let's be real. Don't you think this team is going to dig out of it? Like, don't you really feel like this is probably the most stable team in the division unless Milwaukee's pitching gets strengthened by the trade deadline?
Definitely. I'm confident in their bottom of the lineup. We saw it when they were dealing with injuries early in the year. Slumps happen, this is bound to happen, and they ran into a couple of hot teams in Milwaukee and St. Louis, so it does make sense. But I for sure they will absolutely break out of it. At a minimum, the Stars. But if they do hit that stride that we saw earlier this year, they could easily steamroll past Milwaukee. It could happen quickly. So not counting them out yet.
We've gotten a ton of feedback in our comments and our emails saying that we spend too much time talking about New York Mets and Seattle Mariners baseball. So there you go, guys. The first 10 minutes of our show were all about the dumpster fire that is Chicago. Enjoy yourselves. See, we're high integrity. We vary our content. Dan, you're
Yeah.
up. It's
Yeah, man.
finally time for your first pick of the week. Who you got?
Yeah, let's keep it varied. Let's talk about the Mets.
Oh, Dan, I wasn't going to do you dirty like I did last week and make them go first, but it was definitely a strong candidate. I'm shocked you would go straight for the jugular with your first pick and go ahead and bury your team. But man, there's so much to talk about the 1-5 Mets this week. For the quick rundown before Dan opens the floodgates, guys, first they drop 2 of 3 to the Giants, who are also surging, who are also red hot. We'll be talking about Giants and Cardinals baseball later into the show than we're used to generally. And then the Dodgers sweep them. Bam. Never fun. Never fun watching the Dodgers sweep your team, Dan. But there's so much bigger stories. There's a lot of toxicity running through this organization right now. And sadly, some huge question marks around the role of Pete Alonso as that deadline is coming. Blah, blah, blah. Go ahead, Dan. Talk to me. How do you feel?
Well, I appreciate you not putting them last again, but the
Aw.
Mets deserve to be a sinker again, Warren. The quality
Yeah.
of the games. They only won one against San Francisco, and there's other teams that have only won one game this week, but they're
Yeah.
higher quality wins. And
Mm,
especially the losses to LA, the Mets,
right.
except for one of them, they were in all of those games, which just makes it all the more painful to
Yeah.
lose those in the fashion that they did. It's worth
Mhm.
saying that the Mets so far have played 39 of their 55 games, so all but 2 series against teams over 500.
Yeah.
So they've only have 14 wins out of those series. They've for sure had the hardest schedule out of any team in the league so far to date. And it's going to get a little bit easier the rest of the way, but not a whole lot. So we're taking that into account. The Mets have reached this low point, Warren, and it kind of hit a head in a game against the Dodgers. I'm sure everybody's seen it by now. Jorge
Yeah.
Lopez, who's been around the league quite a bit. He's been with us all year. He's actually the pitcher who we had throw at Hoskins in the first series to open the season, who got suspended for a couple of games. And since he's come back, we've used him in similar roles to that, late in throwaway games. And he's actually racked up some of the highest amount of innings pitched in the entire league. So he's been used a lot this year.
Yeah,
He's
he's
a good
been
pitcher.
important. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think everything just came to a head. Emotionally, I think he kind of blew up. On the play before he got ejected, he made a pickoff attempt. He threw the ball to third base, and the ball hit the umpire at third base, right?
Yeah.
So he was unhappy. When the next batter came up and the catcher called for a check swing and motioned to the third base umpire, he called no check swing, and Lopez motioned and made a gesture and started jawing at the third base umpire, who instantly was screamed at him and said, "What did you say?" and then ejected him. So both guys were emotional, right? Lopez
Yeah.
took it too far, started walking off, threw his glove up over the netting. Warren, the Mets were playing the Dodgers at home, and a Yankee fan caught the glove, which just annoyed me even more. And he's like taking pictures of it and bringing it around the park. He's like giving it to other fans so they could take pictures of it, which was funny.
Man.
As he throws the glove up, his hat falls off into the dirt. He just leaves it there, untucks his jersey, walks out, right?
Wow.
Really ugly scene. If it ended right there, I think the Mets would have DFA'd and released him.
Okay.
I really do. I think with the struggles he had earlier in the year, despite what we've been going through, that was a really bad look. I really think they would have just called it quits right there.
I see.
But then this was a loss that kind of came with mounting losses. So Francisco Lindor called a players meeting immediately after the game. Apparently before that, Lopez was pulled aside by the manager Mendoza and the GM Stearns, talked to about the whole situation. They let him know they were not happy about what happened.
Sure.
And I think kind of let him know that they were still going to make a decision on what they were going to do about it. So he was even more upset and went to the media. And then, English is his second language. So it might have been a miscommunication. Some people say that he said the Mets were the worst team in the league. Some people said he was the worst teammate in the league. When they asked him for clarification on that, he said both probably, which is even worse. Come on, man. But then he came back the next day on social media and said, "That's not what happened. That's not what I said. The media misinterpreted me." But that's why not even going to get into that. It doesn't even really matter. Him throwing the glove and then lying to the media about being talked to by the managers, because they asked him if anyone spoke to him and he said no, even though they did.
Yeah.
Just gone. So a lot of ugliness. Very classic Mets, Warren. I hate to say it, but it's a Mets storyline, and this happens to us every single year. So I can only hope we can put it behind us and try and move forward. I'm not saying the Mets handled it the best. I'm just saying it's over now.
Yeah, it's got to be over. You've got to flush the toilet and move forward. And there's a lot of, bad juju around the Mets. Why would you want to, grab a magnifying glass and look at it closer? Try to direct focus to the other dumpster fires around the league. No offense, Dan, but that's where they're at right now. And you just wish there's so much talent. There's so much talent. There's so much they can do with, it all starts with a good mentality. And I would challenge that there's not a whole lot of good mentality in the Mets mentality. I was trying to make a fun alliteration there. I gave up halfway through, but the reality
the Mets are mesmerized.
The Mets are mesmerized and meticulously mediocre, and that's really a compliment with what they are putting out right now. I want to ask you about the other storyline. Of course, We've seen Kodai Senga getting pushed back and his return, like he's anxiously awaiting the return, and maybe that could be the spark that turns around the season. But we'll tuck that to the side because nothing new came from that. I want to talk about the Pete Alonso situation. There's a ton of buzz around what he will be for this team next year, if anything at all. And is he getting ready to be trade deadline fodder? Dan, like, how do you feel? What's happening next?
Obviously, I hope he's not. But if you just realistically look at the situation, the Mets have proven they're not a playoff team. We
Yeah.
made some adjustments today. We sent Christian Scott and Brett Beatty down to AAA. It's going to give a
Right.
couple other rookies some playing time. And I
Yeah.
will say, despite this slump, the Mets did kind of rebound in their first game against Arizona. A little bit of a spoiler, Warren, but they
Yeah.
did rebound. Lindor went 4 for 4. Alonso went 2 for 4. Like they're starting to show those signs. But it's a fair
Yeah.
question at this point. Is it worth it to move on from Alonso, knowing he will test free agency? He's going to. We know it's going to happen. We're going to
Right.
make him a good offer in free agency. So the question becomes, do we still stand a chance of signing him if we let him go? And is it worth it to let him go? Like I was looking at similar trade scenarios with impact bats, especially infielders in the past traded at the deadline.
Mm-hmm.
They're not often traded for a big haul, Warren, especially in season. You're talking a couple of AAA guys, maybe some backups that can play now. I mean, you're talking about quantity over quality in a return for
Mm-hmm.
something like this. So and honestly, just look at Alonso's numbers. Of course, we know his history, but he has struggled this year. His strikeouts are
Right.
pretty high. His home run numbers were good to start the year, but they've kind of plateaued, and he's not in the top 10 of the league anymore.
Right.
His defense has improved, but you're just not seeing that like top 10 first baseman in the league that we know he can be. So you're not going to get a really great return if we did move on from him. There are other pieces that are potentially on the table, especially on the pitching side of things, like Luis Severino has been fantastic,
Mm-hmm.
and he might
Yeah.
warrant a pretty strong return. But you're
Sure.
right, Warren. Even if we go on a tear coming up here, it's worth considering just the division. Like we're not catching Atlanta or Philly. We're just not. And the rest of the National League is relatively close. The Central could fight to have 3 teams in the playoffs. I think you really need to seriously consider moving on from Alonso and maybe some more pieces. It would hurt, it would suck, and it might
Yeah.
blow your chance of keeping him for next year. But look at what they've done the last few years. This core of Nimmo, Lindor, and Alonso have just not all consistently been on it. This is the third
Right.
year running, and I'll throw McNeil into that thing too. For as much as our payroll is, we are not getting the quality at bats. I mean, the Dodgers have their top 6 are in the top 50 batting average and all the offensive stats in the league. And our
Wow.
payroll is higher than theirs. And we don't have one guy in that conversation. So, yeah, I think with a new GM, I think he's just going to try and sell off as much as he can. And if that means he can get a decent return for Alonso, I think he'll do it.
Wow. Okay. Gosh, so much to unpack. What amazing stuff. And I I think it would be a really bad sign if Alonso gets traded from the Mets that you would sign him again in the offseason. I just would warn against that profusely if you can help it. Um, I just don't know why he would want to come back, right? Especially with all of the swirling BS that we have just discussed. This is tough. And I love you, Dan, for being a baseball fan strong enough to appreciate the game when the hurricane is firmly above your team, right? And you're in the eye of the storm waiting for some sort of downpour. And I respect you for wanting to talk about other teams so much, Dan, that as I pivot us away from the Mets, because
Let me ask
goodness,
you one question, Warren, if I can, really
if
quick.
it's about Luis Torrens,
It's
it's not worth it.
okay, never mind.
No, it's a joke. Guys, Luis Torrens gets picked up by the Mets. He was let go by the Yankees. And Luis Torrens is a former Seattle Mariners backup catcher who had some clutch base hits when they needed it most. I don't know if you guys remember a couple years ago in 2022 when the Seattle Mariners and the Yankees had this extremely tight 0-0 game going into extra innings and everybody was holding their breath for the end of it. It was Luis Torrens who got the base hit that won us that game. Love the guy for that moment. but you're getting an inconsistent contributor whose bat is actually improved, I would say, since his time with Seattle. So you might get a clutch base hit here or there, or a clutch extra base hit from Luis Torrens, Dan, but Francisco Alvarez, he is not. When do you get him back, by the way? And then we really should let the Mets go away, okay?
For sure. He
Yeah.
just started a rehab stint in AA, which is
Okay.
part of the reason we got Torrens, because we'll probably only have him for a week or two. We're going to have a 2-day break before we head to London to play the
Yeah.
Phillies in the London series. So he might
Woo!
only last 2 weeks if Alvarez is ready to come back after that.
Well, and you can only hope. You'd want to have Alvarez back. That would help the team. And JD Martinez continues to swing. He's another one who might get moved here,
Yeah.
though, if they don't start turning around in a hard way very quickly. Good to hear positive momentum was spoiled for this Friday start of the series against the Diamondbacks, friends. The Diamondbacks giving up another loss. And actually, Dan, since you took your favorite team and made sure they were the first you tore apart today, I'm going to do you a solid. You know, I've been bandwagoning for these Arizona Diamondbacks, and Dan himself called the Arizona Diamondbacks done last week. Well, the trend continues of mediocrity in the face of that. The Diamondbacks need to be the next team we talk about. They did drop a game to the Mets as they opened their next week of contests. We won't spoil that too much, but before that, Miami did win, or excuse me, they did drop a series 1-2 to Miami. Nobody wants to see that in 2024 in general if you're a team that thinks they can make playoffs. And then the Texas Rangers swept them too in a rematch of the World Series from this past year. And never a good sign either when you look that flat footed against your core competition for all of the marbles, right? So this isn't a team that's inspiring me as much as they used to, Dan. My bandwagon, commitment is kind of wavering for sure. Like, I don't know why I would cheer on them on much more unless they really start building some consistency across their lineup. They started the season with a 16 and some schlubbing of a cruddy team in Colorado, right? How come they haven't recaptured that? Like, where is that? We've been looking for it the whole season. Go ahead, Dan. You already said they're done. Throw more dirt on the Diamondbacks for me.
Man, you don't have to root for him, but this is still your pick to win the NL West, Warren. So they have time to come back, but yeah, I don't know if it's going to happen.
Sure.
The Diamondbacks, the offense does not resemble last year's at all, not even a little bit.
I mean,
And
Christian Walker still gets to do his thing. Christian
sure,
Walker's pummeling baseballs, but
and
yeah,
Ketel Marte, Ketel Marte, of course, is still there too. And
sure.
Gurriel's getting better, but not hitting the heights that he did last year.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've seen this kind of epic Warren sophomore slump from Corbin Carroll. It
Yeah, it's
really is, I think,
demoralizing.
reaching epic proportions at this point. And
Mm-hmm.
it's even extending defensively. They're they had the Arizona Diamondbacks so far are one of the worst defensive teams in the entire league. 24 errors
Mm-hmm.
at this point. Only Ketel Marte and Christian Walker are plus war defensive guys. And Corbin Carroll hasn't even really, he's been better. I will absolutely say he's been better, but he hasn't made up for his offensive deficiencies playing
Mm-hmm.
defense in the field. This is a
Wow.
team that has a bullpen that is pretty leaky. So if they don't
Mm-hmm.
have the offense going, the bullpen isn't enough to support it. And honestly, they got kind of exposed against Miami
Yeah.
because none of those were high scoring games. The pitching didn't
Right.
throw away those games. They gave them a chance to win, and the offense couldn't deliver. And
Oof.
I'm just not seeing any signs of improvement, Warren. I think there will be
Yeah.
series like maybe this one against the Mets where the Diamondbacks can get a little bit back on track. But in
Mm-hmm.
their own division, they've fallen to fourth place now. And they might not slip back any further, but it's becoming harder and harder to keep up in the stack division.
Yeah, a stacked division, one that has San Francisco making an impressive push here at the 30% mark. You look at San Diego doing their best to look like a contender and will be trying to piece it together the rest of the season. And of course, Los Angeles is historically intimidating, right, on the books. So it's really hard to believe if they don't start winning series that we don't see some really impressive pieces of this lineup go away. There's buzz around Jock Peterson, of course, being a prime candidate with the quality he's put up. Oh, what? Another strong hitting outfielder? Gosh, I wonder which teams might have a use for that.
Mhm.
Anyway, there's a lot of pieces here that have just not been able to give them the results they wish for. And, it's empty for words from me, guys, because it's just happening over and over and over again. We get it. Arizona, this is not working. And it's a super big bummer about Corbin Carroll's slump. You have to wonder where stuff like that comes from, but it's a cliche in baseball for a reason, which makes you excited for who he can be maybe next season. But, the flashes of what he can do that we're seeing this year that are so positive, it just proves he's got it. He's just got to, figure out why he doesn't have it consistently. And boy, there are a lot of other scenarios that sound similar to that. So, of course, I take my hat off to him as he tries to figure it out. We know he can be a great player, and for this team, he's been so important already. He'll have a good career, but hey, the slump is real, and it is depressing. But
He's just in his own head right now.
And that sucks. It sucks when you're that good and you're in your head. So much to talk about later in the show with certain other teams, guys. Holy cow. Oh, anyway, can't wait to break that down, of course, getting later on. So let's just move on. The Arizona Diamondbacks, I'm falling off your bandwagon just a little bit. I'll still root for you if you build it back up, but I don't think I'm in as much of a hurry to get a matching red Diamondback hat with my Mariners hat anymore. Hate to say it, but not a whole lot. Oh, and Suarez isn't doing what he was, brought in to do for Arizona either. So I'm glad to see that I still don't feel bad about that decision, if you care at all, Dan. But
I think you were starting to. You were reaching a point a couple weeks ago, I think, where you were starting to have full-on regret on that move.
It started to hurt a little bit. I'm not going to lie, but yeah, I just don't see him being as important to this lineup in this defensive group. I mean, he was incredibly important defensively for Seattle last year and did an amazing job at third base. Did Eugenio Suarez, guys, if you've missed who I've slumped our conversation into. But obviously you just talked on how the defensive efficiency is embarrassing out in Arizona. So obviously he's not been able to fill that gap as effectively this year. But good amount of dirt for the Diamondbacks to slither through. Can they bounce back against the Mets? Yeah, well, time will tell if they can win the rest of the series out. And then San Francisco's also coming up, and they've been playing red hot. So the woes could very well continue unless Arizona starts surprising us, which it's not happening. Remember, Dan already called them done, and I will bring that up every week from here on out. You're up, Dan. Who is going to be team number 26? Let's start speeding it up for a little bit.
Yeah, I think we got to call out the Angels, who are only a little bit higher at this point because their one win was against the Yankees.
Yeah.
1-1 win against the Yankees. That ain't easy, Warren, but
never.
Yeah, we've talked about it before. It's a lot of the same. I think the culture that we were kind of raving is starting to cave in on Ron Washington a little bit, Warren.
Yeah.
The losses are starting to mount.
Yeah.
The pitching is killing them, even when the offense is actually starting to improve a little bit. You're seeing a lot of these younger players, these draft picks that they've had that they've been developing, getting the playing time due to all the injuries they have, especially in the infield.
Yeah.
But yeah,
and Kevin Pillar, by the way, has been like suddenly the offensive stalwart being brought into the game. Like he's just cool hand Luke. I want him on my team too, but keep going.
Yeah, and Luis Renifo, due to support, he was a bench player at the start of the season, right? He was a fill-in. He's like, he can play anywhere, and now he is playing everywhere every day. So they're doing what they can, but yeah, the Angels deserve to be a sinker. You've probably seen a few games, Warren. What do you think?
No. I mean, even my beloved fiance, who's a diehard Angels fan, is kind of already dead this season. She's not really prioritizing their matchups, and that's in summary of what an Angels fan probably feels all across the fan base. This continues to be a beleaguered, confused, and identity, erratic squad. You can't tell what the continuity will be, but God bless Luis Renifo for how great he's played for this team. I'm starting to see buzz that with his about year and a half left of team control, he might be on the move at the trade deadline, which will break, the segment of my heart that's an Angel, a little bit. I'm sure it will for Tiffany too. But there's no reason not to when all of your team stinks. When your team just doesn't have a winning culture and doesn't have a winning mind frame and doesn't have a winning direction. You might as well let your Taylor Wards potentially go. Oh wait, what's that? A hard hitting and consistently hitting outfielder? Oh man, I bet there's teams out there that want that. I can't tell you how disappointed it is, certainly, but is it really all that surprising? We knew this was going to be one of the worst teams in baseball when we opened up the season. We just kind of crossed our fingers and our toes and thought, what if this is the year where magically they can put it together? But everything's just gone as wrong as it has. And that is where we can leave the discussion of the Angels for this week, because there's really no point pointing it out any harder. I keep waiting for Patrick Sandoval, Dan, to be like the best pitcher on this team. And I like what he can do at the mound, but I feel like he's always just one or two key mistakes away from having a good outing. And it's happening more and more. And, when that guy was kind of labeled softly as kind of your ace, yes, I know Reed Detmers and Tyler Anderson are playing so much better for the Angels right now, but I don't know. My heart breaks a little extra for Patrick Sandoval because he has so much good stuff, and then it just falls off a cliff. He's like kept in there one or two pitches too long. You know what I mean? Which,
Right.
I could talk on for other teams too, but we'll leave it at that. Really don't need to spend too much more real estate on the Angels, who find themselves at the bottom of our lineup again, or our anti-rankings, after a surprisingly high appearance last week. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Red. How about some more red? We're going to dish some out, and as I look at the teams that had bad weeks that are left, I'm going to continue to shoot at low-hanging fruit and leave the ones that are going to shock us a little bit more to you, Dan. You're good at that. I am going to rock the Athletics, keep it in the division, because the Athletics have also struggled this week against better teams, period. And that's been going on for a few weeks now. The trend of them being exciting and fun is kind of in our rear view mirror right now. They did drop 2 of 3 to Houston, and they did drop 2 of 3 to the the Tampa Bay Rays. Two teams who also feel either, struggling really bad in Houston's case, or really ambiguous on their reality are these Rays. So this is not a good look for the Athletics. Not a surprising one either. Their young and plucky lineup can only do so much, and so here we are. Dan, talk on it. Do you have anything to say about these Athletics, who find themselves feeling a little bit more at the bottom of the league where we expected them to be these last few weeks?
Yeah, it hurts when they lose these close games that it feels like they can win. And that was the case in Tampa. That could have been a series sweep for them, honestly, but they just couldn't finish the job. And then when they lost in game 2, that momentum just carried over into game 3. And the bullpen was, not as strong as what we've seen in the past outside of Miller. And that's bound to happen, over the course of a season. Those things are bound to happen. But yeah, the A's are just more and more becoming a team to look at for those individuals that might get moved, right? And
Yep.
since we know the thinking of the organization, that they want to bolster the teams of the future, and they're not necessarily putting the best team on the field right now because making a case for relocation. So yeah, it's just a matter of time, honestly. And I would love to see this A's team piss off the owner and win every game and go on their run and fulfill the script, Warren. But it would have to start happening.
Moneyball.
It could still happen, who knows? Maybe after the deadline, we get late into July, they go on a 15-0 run and the conversation changes. But I just don't see it happening for this Ace team, Warren. I think that the coming up, they're going to be playing 3 against Atlanta and then 3 against Seattle. It's going to be a real test for them. And if they have a week similar to the week they had here, I think that our expectations aren't going to change for Oakland.
Yeah, and I there you have it. It's that simple. I mean, the Braves, as we'll discuss pretty shortly here, I'm sure, are hobbling. We get it, but they're still an infinitely better team on paper than the Athletics are, and even Seattle will probably just need their pitchers to get through that one too. They just have to try to miss some of the most impressive bats. We've talked about how obviously Oakland, if they're good at anything, surprisingly, it's home runs. And they can run into a couple balls here or there with guys like Shane Langoliers, Brent Rooker, and Zach Geloff. But other than that, there's not a whole lot to worry about. They're actually second place behind the Mariners in strikeouts. We will, of course, underline Seattle's terrible plate play a little later in our talk once again. But for now, I do want to point out that they're about 29, I think, 27 or 29 strikeouts behind Seattle. So not quite as woeful at the plate, but they're one of the teams that either hits a dinger or strikes out. They're striking out a lot. But I can't say that. Like, what the hell am I doing? What soapbox am I on? So,
No, you would know.
Oakland.
You would be the one to talk on.
Yes, I'm the professor of strikeouts, my good man. And when you swing and you miss, you have to sit down. Ah, yes, rocket science.
So complicated.
Complicated is not what I would describe this decision, putting the Athletics in the basement. Maybe it's going to get complicated from here, Dan. I know you've got some fun curveballs you get to throw whenever you're ready. Is this the time where we get one? Starting high in the zone and down below. Who's next?
Yeah, listen, this is what our rankings are all about, right? Like it's
Yep.
about the quality of the wins and losses from the week. And
Yep.
this team managed just 2 wins against
Yep.
teams below 500. So it's got to be the Atlanta Braves, Warren. For the 3rd week in a row, they're sinking again. They're just going
Yeah.
down, Warren, and it's not
Yeah.
looking good. So we spent the time talking about the power struggles. We spent the time talking about how they haven't had exactly the best fill-ins from the bottom of the roster.
Yeah.
Obviously, the news of this week is an ACL tear for Robert Acuna Jr.
Yeah, let's make this really serious for just a second and say prayers to Ronald Acuna on so many levels, physically especially, but mentally and emotionally, this is a terrible week for the perennial National League MVP contender. Like, nobody wanted him to get off to the start of the season he's had, and now, injury to insult, he's out. And man, you see people writing all over about baseball saying this is bad for the sport. This is how bad the injury is. As a Mets fan, you're probably at least a little bit like happy about this. But I wonder how you feel if you can look at it from a fan of the sport, a fan of the drama that we've been building about this season together in conversation. Like, what does this do to the whole outlook of the year? And are you really in any way torn up about it? Is a question I couldn't wait to ask you this week.
I feel for the player, man, because I've seen a lot of him, and I think he has like the talent of that young Tatis Jr., but without the cockiness. I think he's a really mature, well-rounded player. And part of the reason is because in 21, he tore his ACL in his other knee, and he sat on the bench and watched his team make some great deadline acquisitions and go on a run and win the whole thing. So I'm devastated for him because I cannot imagine what the rehab for that is, that year-long process and working his way back from that to finally get back. And he probably knew right there on the field that he was going to have to go through all of it again on the other leg. And that's just devastating. And you don't want to see that. So it's horrible from that perspective of things. From a Mets perspective, I'm not happy to see the Braves down in Acuna, but I'm much less happy that the last time this happened, they won the freaking World Series, Warren.
That's true.
My expectations for the Braves just went up because now with Acuna on the IL, their GM again has incentive to be aggressive at the deadline, to go out and get what he needs to. I mean, essentially, Warren, this injury is going to move Jared Kelenic to a full-time starting role with the team, right? And you have Adam Duvall, who's probably going to be the everyday right fielder. I'm not sure that that's really your best opportunity. He's only hitting 204 right now. So this is going to, if only, incentivize the Braves to make moves to get even stronger. So I'm not happy about it in that regard. I'm worried about it. I hope.
And while you're stumbling over that speed bump, let me share with you, you have every right to be nervous, because who did I say would be the difference maker in Cleveland this year in order for them to win the division? I said it would be Ramon Laureano, right? The injured Oakland Athletics star who's still trying to rekindle his career, now getting DFA'd or released really by the Cleveland Guardians and immediately getting scooped up by the Braves. Could he be the difference maker? Maybe not for Cleveland, but for Atlanta? Couldn't help but point that out. Kind of an interesting pickup. But yeah, you're right. The aggression is already getting ramped up, and that is a bad sign for those who might expect the Atlanta Braves to lay down. Not when they've done so much to set up so much success. You will expect them to try really hard to still win. But yeah, having Jared Kelenic as an everyday left fielder does sound a bit like a empty investment, a little bit, as I say a little smugly. We'll see. But there's definitely some problems, Dan. And I was talking to my Atlanta homie about this. He's a huge Braves fan and is really growing into his baseball fandom this past year. And he wants to say that he continues to feel that ever since your Mets crushed that Botnato bomb with with which, if you guys didn't catch that earlier in our conversations this year, it means bottom of the ninth, 2 out, home run, right? It was the worst example of Castor's curse I think Atlanta's ever perpetrated when the broadcaster stated that they were just 1 out away, were these Braves, from the first no-hitter in 20 years in Atlanta, when JD Martinez, you know JD, homered, right, to break that fantastic prophecy, and since then Atlanta has not played the same. Literally, he's noticed that, and when I look at the numbers, he's kind of sort of not wrong. Are they just falling victim to the worst caster's curse in 20 years? I would
Man,
think so.
when you go in and you lose 2 to Pittsburgh and then 3 to a divisional rival in Washington, I mean, it's just it has to be. It's like they're rolling downhill, Warren. You're right. If
Yeah,
that was the tipping point for the boulder is rolling downhill. It's picking up speed. Guys are getting hurt as it's happening. Things are
yeah,
happening fast. And all the while this has been going on, Warren, the Braves are not in first place and haven't been for a
no,
couple weeks now. The Phillies have marched past them. They're now 6 games ahead of Atlanta and have
yep.
shown not nearly the injuries that Atlanta has had. So this should be very concerning for Atlanta right now. Still worried as a divisional rival. I'm still very worried about them, but on edge.
Will sand be put into these cracks to shore everything up literally the next time we talk? We've got 10 games to look forward to between now and our next conversation, Dan. Anything can happen in Atlanta land when they're scrambling to stay near the top of your consideration as one of the better teams in baseball. There's still plenty of things that can be done to make that happen. They've already begun. Let's see where they are in 10 more days. But yes, Atlanta is 3 weeks in a row near the bottom of our rankings, guys. The anti-rankings are not smiling favorably on Atlanta right now. So you fair weather fans need to realize that it's stormy outside. And we'll have to see if you guys can stave off the weather. Dano, great choice, buddy. I know you've got some more curveballs in your clip, so I'm gonna go ahead and target another team that you might argue to be a American League wildcard contender, but has continued to flounder here or there, especially this week. How about Boston? The Boston Red Sox can sit at number 23 of our countdown. At 28-28, they're one of the true mid teams of the league. I mean, you look at the Cardinals that are there right now. You look at I think the Jays are about there right now, the Blue Jays. So that's interesting. And I think another team that's around the 500 line that was just whispering in the back of my mind doesn't matter. Just surprising. Oh, the Cubs. Cubs are back at 500. So like these teams are all in different trajectories despite that, pretty important record milestone that they're all swirling around. And Boston's is just kind of trending downwards after giving up 2 losses to a superior Milwaukee team at the moment, and then 2 of 3 to the Baltimore Orioles. So tough competition this week. This is an expected pair of series losses. But if you're a team that's trying to say, no, for real, we really are contenders with our fantastic pitching staff and with our young and up and coming lineup of batters who could get it done on any given day, it would seem, right? They're not out of the running in any matchup, it would seem, yet, but they failed. They just kind of failed. At least they got wins over Milwaukee. 1 win over Milwaukee, 1 win over Baltimore. You can hang your hat on that a tad, but overall, just not a great week for Boston. Tell me why you think I might be overreacting of putting them here. I bet you're not going to try very hard.
No, man. As far as I'm considered, Boston is falling down from their early season success back to probably the area they should be, which is around 500. who knows how much far it'll go. You mentioned it's pretty impressive to see some of the rookies getting some playing time. The
Yeah.
injuries are still obviously there. Devers has managed to stay relatively healthy. I still think he's playing hurt, Warren. I don't think he's 100%, but he's
Mhm.
in there, which is what they need. And unfortunately, Tyler O'Neill went back to the injured list. But all these things are
Mhm.
giving opportunities for playing time to guys like Willie Abreu, David Hamilton, and Emmanuel Valdez was a recent call up who's going to get some playing time in Tyler O'Neill's spot in the outfield. So that's really
Mhm.
encouraging. And it's encouraging that these guys, I should say, have actually done kind of well, all things considered. None of
Right.
them have 100 plate appearances yet, and they all have averages over 200. So pretty
Mhm.
good for getting your first taste of the major leagues. But
Right.
yeah, at this point, I think I'm looking at the Red Sox, and just like some of these other teams were, and I'm thinking like, is Kenley Jansen going to go somewhere? Is Nick Pivetta
Right.
going to get shipped to the National League? It's just a matter of time at this point before I think Boston throws in the towel, and I think that's okay because they're giving the opportunity to these young players. It actually could be kind of exciting because if you got Devers and Story coming back healthy next year, you can manage to retain O'Neill, and you get a year of service time for some of these younger guys. Boston could be a lot more competitive
Yeah.
next year. And that could be encouraging in a division where Tampa and Toronto are really not super threatening right now. Boston
No.
could turn this around pretty fast, especially with the pitching they have. So that's pretty encouraging.
Yeah, pitching is the groundwork for a great franchise, in my humble opinion. Of course, I would have that humble opinion. So, what they've got and how they can turn this into a long-term success is really not that separated, right? And I agree with you. Maybe not sell every young player out there, get rid of maybe a couple of the vets. Not that I would name them right now. I have to look at their roster and decide who would be worth selling, but they probably don't need to do as much as they think they do because they're overachieving this year if they do end up falling outside the playoff considerations. But there's still enough they might be able to do to piece together a contender this year. I mean, could they be buyers at all? I'm just curious because they do hover around 500. There's no reason why they, well, might not believe that with a couple of extra bats with some experience, say some outfielders who make consistent contact, Dan, like a Taylor Ward, right? Or
Tommy Pham,
Tommy Pham, like obviously if you can make a difference in Chicago, why not make a difference in Boston?
Brent Rooker.
So Brent Rooker, great idea. Why not? I mean,
There's a
if we're,
lot.
there's a lot of potential right at the moment for a team hovering around 500 unexpectedly, and with the pitching they have, as long as they don't sell that, they could be just fine next year. They really could, quicker than expected.
No one
Are,
touched Cutter Crawford. He needs to stay.
look how excited we are about a Boston starting rotation and a Brian Bello, right?
Mm-hmm.
We would prefer to invest in him. So yeah, Boston's getting exciting. Maybe not this year, but over the course of the next few years, depending on the decisions they make in the coming weeks. So I'm sure next week, Dan, or the next show we have, we're going to be really intensely focused on those trade candidates out there because we're going to be coming up on the trade deadline. So look for us to really talk more in detail about most eligible, sign off pieces next show. But this next series or several series are really going to define where they sit. First, they've got Detroit, who Detroit looks a lot like Seattle. Great pitching rotation, not great on the offense. So you'll learn a lot about how you may or may not struggle with them. And then also on the Boston docket, just after that, is good old Atlanta. 2 games against Atlanta, another quick chance to check how they really feel against teams that are, well, on paper to be better amongst the league. But maybe it's a great time to catch them with 2 games for Boston. We'll see how they do. But very much in the middle, but this week trending down against better teams. Can they themselves be a better team in Boston? We will find out. More to come. For the jury's still out on those guys, which is crazy because you've been written them off for weeks, but they don't let themselves go completely away, do they? Okay, but they're off our count. We got spot number 22, Dan. You're working the evens this week. Who do you got next? I think it's a pretty obvious choice if it were me, and it's going to be fun for you to talk about them if you follow the pattern. Who do we got?
Man, I hate patterns. So I am going to blow your mind, Warren, because
Okay.
I'm all about quality this week. Quality wins and quality losses.
Cool.
So What number are we on?
We're on 22. Your 22nd
Dude,
worst team in the league is
Warren, it's obvious to me the 22nd team has got to be the Los Angeles Dodgers.
What are you doing to my life right
Yeah,
now?
that's right, man.
What
3 and
is
3 week. And let me tell you, Warren, it's because they got swept by the
mm.
Cincinnati Reds, the
Woo.
reeling Reds. We thought they were
Mm-hmm.
resurging, but no, they're reeling. And then the 3
Mm-hmm.
wins they managed were a sweep over my Mets that were ranked 28 in our rankings. And as I mentioned, I don't see quality in those wins. It was
Yep.
pretty for the Dodgers to come back in the couple they did, but the Mets threw so many of those games away, and I think they could have easily managed a sweep over the Dodgers if things went a little different.
You know what I'm holding in my hand right now, Dan?
What?
It's a book. Got a little book here. You know what it's called?
What?
It was a Tale of Two series. Okay.
Mhm.
Tale of Two series. Let
Yeah,
me open up a Tale of Two series by the Los
yeah,
Angeles Dodgers.
yeah. What's the first line, Warren?
It was the worst of times. It was the best of times.
Oh,
That is what this week made me think. Yes, that's right. I'm bringing literature references into our baseball conversation because I am cultured. And what you need to know is that getting swept by Cincinnati to precurse a sweep of the Mets is about as separate of two circumstances as you can imagine. Two teams you absolutely would expect to sweep, and you really only get one. The other one makes you look kind of foolish. I mean, Jonathan India was a huge like resurging power bat in that series that kind of opened my eyes, and Spencer Steer had some clutch moments too. It wasn't just about Cincinnati, but it was more about Dodgers failures here. Talk to us more. I think it's hilarious that this is the book we get to read about the Dodgers this week to put them so low in these countdowns, but I think the pain's going to get worse with my next pick. So give me more. Why are the Dodgers this disappointing?
listen, man. After getting swept by Cincinnati, that extended their losing streak to 5 games,
Ah.
and they did rebound with those 3 wins against the Mets, but it has been abysmal, their bottom of the lineup recently. In any
Mm-hmm.
game where Otani gets the day off or Mookie and Freddie don't go off, they have been getting zero support from the back of the lineup. Now, James Outman, who has struggled majorly in the outfield, he was just sent back down to AAA to work on it a little bit.
Yeah.
Andy Paez is a guy who's actually got a really hot start and has been getting playing time out there. But now he's starting to cool off. And then you just that rotating cast of Kike, Chris Taylor, and Jason Hayward. It's just not enough. And Gavin Lux lately too, defensively
Mm-hmm.
and offensively. I mean, it's such an odd juxtaposition, Warren, to see the
Mm-hmm.
top 5 bats of the Dodgers lineup, basically all within the top 25 of the league, and then the bottom 4, none of them rank in the top 200 as of today. That is a shocking difference. And even though the pitching side of things has improved a lot since Walker Buehler has been back,
Mm-hmm.
I am seeing some real red flags from this Dodger team. And of course, you can expect their 3-headed MVP monster to win some games for them, right? But that's not how this team was constructed. They were supposed to be power throughout the lineup. They're supposed to be deep. They're supposed to be defensively aggressive. And we're
Mm-hmm.
just not seeing that at the same rate we were before. Now, it's worth pointing out that our old friend Teoscar Hernandez is really heating up, Warren. I mean, that
I
home run count
know.
keeps ticking up. And just as of right now, he's up to 12. Still just barely trailing Shohei, but that's moving up really well. The Dodgers are sinking for me mostly, Warren, because of some series they absolutely should have won. And that back of the lineup, I can't get over it because of their aspirations of World
Mm-hmm.
Series. It's that important. It will cost them if they don't get it sorted out.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's World Series or bust for these Dodgers, and every red flag, or even an orange flag, needs to be treated with some respect. And one of those red flags is that at 72 strikeouts, Teoscar Hernandez is technically in third place for most in the league, though there are 4 players tied at 74. Cincinnati's Will Benson, Pittsburgh's O'Neill Cruz. We have Ezekiel Tovar from Colorado at 74 and Ellie De La Cruz also on Cincinnati. Boy, they are struggling at the plate, aren't they? At 74 themselves. Kyle Schwarber is the only other player that separates Hernandez from that crop of 74 swingers. So he's starting to, he's just a breath away from the worst strikeout total in the league, which makes me feel just a little bit better. And that's why I gave it a whole, minute to discuss it. But the truth is that we know, of course, that anytime we can kick the Dodgers in the groin, we might want to, because they're not going to allow that a whole hell of a lot, unless, of course, they start seeing some Atlantean-like injuries and a derailing of the expectation. And we just have no reason to believe that yet, especially with Colorado and Pittsburgh on the horizon this week. As interesting as it is to watch Pittsburgh baseball right now, and I guess arguably Colorado, after all, at least Colorado will be on the road this week. You know what I mean? The point is like they're likely not to have a bad week moving forward. But there are reasons for concern. It's not going to be something they can waltz to and just walk into the playoffs ready to win it all, right? So they have to play the games. They need to prove that they are as stable as they can be. And every team around the league is watching every moment of their baseball games as they can, looking for those weaknesses and those ways to get those incredible players to miss the baseball. So keep showing them reasons to be optimistic, right? Do these Dodgers. They're not nearly as dominant as you really would have expected them to be. They really are not. And this week that shows. So a good old plucky pick from Dan. Look at you go. I love it.
Love it.
You know what, Dan? I reward you that. I reward that from my co-host. So I'm going to give you a nice alley-oop as a piece of candy. You see, I thought he was going to slam dunk the obvious choice to be next, but not as obvious the rest are expecting for the rest of the year. They had a terrible week, though, and that's why they belong here. The Philadelphia Phillies see a crazy. Yeah, you're excited, Dan. The divisional
whole
rival.
division's down here, dude.
Yeah, take a hit, take a hit, take a hit. They deserve it. It's about time. Wow, the NL East had such a nasty week, I suppose. And that's what we'll do with the Phillies. They belong here. Listen, guys. Right. They may not be the most striking out team as far as their pitching staff, right? They strike out the second most pitchers right now, is what I think I can say about these Phillies. They had a grip on the most strikeouts in the league for a while. They're dominant. They're scary. They're offensively capable. This week is just not a good week for the capable offense out in Philadelphia. And it showed because Colorado blasted by them in a best of three series. That was surprising, we know, but it was in Colorado, where anything apparently can happen, and the baseball gods smile on strange circumstances. But then the other team that proved that they really are not an anomaly against them were the San Francisco Giants, who have now had 2 weeks in a row where they're really spicy and exciting to watch. Which is shocking due to their injury concerns, but we'll talk about that later. Philadelphia at 2-4 just needs to eat what they've poured out for themselves this week, man. It's just not a good week. They're still 39-18. Don't worry. They're still offensively dominant. They're still a team that you would expect to see winning this next set against St. Louis and then against Milwaukee. But those two teams are still proving how capable they are at this moment. So some good baseball on the horizon for Philadelphia. How do you feel about the Phillies? Finally having a down week, Dan. They finally lost some games. They had 2 perfect weeks in a row for us. And now they're a sinker, essentially, metaphorically. They had a bad week. Enjoy. Feast, Dan. Feast. This is for you.
I think this is the right spot for them because they're pretty low, but higher than some of the competition, because I am going to credit Colorado. Those games at home, those are games Colorado has to win. It's all about the home games for Colorado this year and out slugging. We saw Philly go into Colorado, and we saw a lot of those home run numbers go up. We saw Castellanos really break out of the slump that he's been in. Maybe not getting on base as much as we'd like to see, but he hit 3 home runs. We saw Schwarber hit a few more home runs. Yep. So that was really encouraging to see. And then, running into a hot Giants team, like you mentioned, it's a little discouraging, honestly, for the National League, because this is a team that they might run into in the playoffs down the line. But if you take a step back from some of just the overall good offensive numbers, and not going to pick on anybody a little bit too much, it seems like they have this bench rotation that they're struggling to figure out how to get their best lineup out there consistently.
Mm-hmm.
With Cassiano struggles, you've seen a rotation of Cody Clemens and Whit Merrifield. Christian
Mm-hmm.
Pache's been thrown out there occasionally, platooning versus lefties and righties. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is maybe the Phillies are going to reach a point
Mm-hmm.
where Warren, maybe they go out and grab an outfielder. We've talked about it a few
Oh.
times from a few of these different teams, but now they
Mm-hmm.
know that Acuna's out and they know how the Braves can be aggressive. So
Mm-hmm.
do the Phillies go out and they say, no, we're going to get Pham or we're going to get Rooker, maybe steal somebody from the Braves from under their
Mm-hmm.
nose, or knowing that they're going to get someone, try and stay at that level of competitive.
Mm-hmm. Hey, it could be the smart choice. It could be the right thing to do to shore this up a little bit. I mean, you've got some great outfielders out there. I've talked a lot about Brandon Marsh, but maybe not enough about Johan Rojas, who's really, I mean, I remember watching him defensively in last year's playoff and thinking he's a piece of their future too. You got Kyle Schwarber, who will run and will slug. What a cool piece he's been at their starting of their lineup, honestly. And then, yeah, maybe you need one more to really look like a top shelf team for that outfield to be stable. I may even be blanking on their other outfielder who's naturally starting for them. Forgive me, and I
It's
apologize.
it's
But
been it's been Nick or Witt, like a rotation.
oh yes, and Nick Castellanos has been, as you put it, an albatross for this crew. And that needs to not be the case if this team is going to be as strong as they want to look as playoff games arrive. So maybe, yeah, maybe that could be something you shore up too. Interesting insights, but this is a team that's buying, 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 buying. So don't you worry about this being a disintegrating story in Philadelphia. Despite their placement this week, they're going to be A-OK, and they're going to be getting buffer over the next couple of weeks. Who knows what new additions we might be highlighting in just 10 days, Dan? The Philadelphia is definitely a team that might just bolster their, or hedge their bets, if you will, with some extra talent. Gosh, they're fun to watch though. If you get a chance to watch those Philadelphia Phillies, even when they struggle, they're kind of fun to root against because they're that dang good right now. Go Phillies, honestly, if you don't mind me saying, sorry, Dan, but they're the best
Okay,
team in the they're the best
whatever.
team in the division right now. They're the best team in the division right now. They're they're the worst of the NL East, or the best of the NL East this week. Though there is a team we haven't talked about from this division, the last one from this division we haven't talked about, and it's kind of a weird scenario. As a matter of fact, it tastes so funny. I hope we correct it soon, but honestly, they had a better week than the next week or team I'm going to talk about. One that had to be a loser, right? Had to be a loser. I got to pick somebody who's had more losses than wins just to keep it fair and real. And for that, I'm going to have to do the Houston Astros. They went 3-4 this week to take the 20th spot in our countdown. They were right in the middle of the league last week, and so that means the trend going downwards is real. And I'm grateful for it. I really am. Key reason, of course, is that Houston did give up 3 losses out of 4 potential in Seattle. They did get that one win to prevent the first sweep of those Astros in Seattle in team history. I was praying for it, but I knew that Houston probably wouldn't let that happen, and that's what happened. They did also, these Houston Astros, win 2 of 3 against Oakland to ensure they didn't look completely abysmal this week, but they did go 3-4. They take a slight step backwards, and when you're trying to dig yourself out of the hole they've left them in, that's a big deal, and I'm very happy about it. Are they knocked out of the playoff contention? No, 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 no. Unfortunately, they can still win every game that they possibly can from here on out and blow us all away, but it's getting darker and darker in Spaceland. How do you feel about Houston, Dan, and where they sit after this week's play?
Well, even though you stole my draft pick at number 20,
Ha
I'm pretty. I agree. Houston should be here. It's definitely the right spot for them. Struggled against Seattle. That's not really surprising, but some close games in there, Warren. And something that
Yep.
I saw is I feel like Josh Hader is finally finding it. It's been a lot better in his last few starts. And that's something that they needed for a long time. So he's kind of,
Yeah,
I think, at this point, taken over that closing responsibility. And Presley has been more of his setup man. So that
right.
competition has kind of faded into the background. And Jose Abreu is back, Warren. He got called up. He
Yes.
already got 2 hits and a ribby.
Yep.
And, that's something that they've been waiting for. It's not like their offense really needed the help, but they'll take it.
But he was a bit of a liability on defense, if you don't mind me pointing that out.
True.
He does look a step slow on one of the most important defensive positions, and we'll have to see if he could play better to avoid continuing to see himself out the door for a Houston team that needs to turn it around. I mean, he's looking like somebody they could trade for younger pieces in order to get some more talent at that position, whether it has to be for this year or for next. He just doesn't look as good as you need your starting first baseman to be. And it looked, I mean, I'm thankful for that for the Seattle series because we picked on him a couple times and he gave up some pretty important plays. So yeah, back with the team. Okay, go ahead and get your offense, but you have to expect that. You need a first baseman who can swing the bat if you're going to be a successful team in Major League Baseball. So fine, enjoy them, but that's it. That's it that he gave them, and I still think he's a bit of a liability. But keep going. I stopped your momentum because I couldn't help but point out Abreu's his defense full of holes. Keep going.
Yeah, you're right, man. And that's really it for the most part. Like the rotation to me with Javier and Yocote,
Mm,
it's lacking. It's distinctly lacking. I think Verlander is starting to maybe resemble what we expected a little bit more, but I still
yeah.
don't think he's quite 100% yet. And yeah, I think Houston's offense is good enough that I could see them
Hmm.
being aggressive when it comes to pitching and maybe trying to make some moves so they can jump back into the conversation. And
Hmm.
Warren, I was so ready to just throw them under the bus just a few weeks ago, but I don't know. Now I'm starting to. I hear your voice in the back of my head. The Astros don't feed the Astros.
No.
Don't give them momentum.
For all of the trash talking that subliminally goes on about Seattle being at the top of the division right now, everybody's just watching that division, waiting for it to flip on its head, or at least for the Texas teams to start flourishing. And so zero interest in that. I do not allow anyone to sleep on these Astros personally. Please continue to play them as hard as you would as if they were prepping for a playoff run. You want to continue to show they're no longer the top of the American League. I'm totally not buying into their demise. How about you, Dan? Last week you said we had a chance to knock them out. Did our 3-1 do enough, or do you feel as if it's just, they're in a coma? Maybe
I
Houston's in a
think
coma.
that has to keep happening. Those
Yeah.
that series win, like that has to keep happening at least
Yep.
until if we get to the All-Star break and they're in a similar situation, then I can call them. Then I'll report the time of death for you, Warren. But until
Yeah.
then, not ready.
I feel ya. You keep an eye on those fan graphs playoff rankings. One of my favorite things to keep an eye on as we start to call these teams dead. And Houston still sits there as like the most likely team to make the playoffs outside of Seattle. And so until that changes, until we're all starting to feel like it is real, then murder the Astros, fire truck the Astros. The Astros are coming. They're coming. Gosh darn it. But they're sitting at number 20 for this week's countdown at my own hand. Pain. Dan, it's your turn. Please, a 19th team
It's
must
your
be
turn.
given way. Oh, that's right. I'm odd today. How odd for me. Houston will take 20th spot, and I'm gonna take. I mean, they would have been my 20th, Dan. Actually,
Mine
they
too.
would have.
So that's why.
Yeah. Let's see. Up next for this squad needs to be another one that's losing more than they are winning. And not too many of those left, gang, but I guess this team needs to be the next one to go. And Dan, it's going to hurt you a little bit. They were perfect last week, and they are one of the most exciting teams to watch in baseball. Please don't get me wrong, because we all feel a little good about them. But at 19, it's because they just couldn't quite get it done when it mattered, did the Kansas City Royals.
Oof,
They did
yeah.
go. Yeah, it was a tough week for them, man. They went 3-4. They got the 2 wins you'd expect from the Rays. That team is still really confused, yet not talked about. How is they still not talked about today? Gosh, those Rays are weird. And then Minnesota knocks them out 3 out of 4, and I think that's why Kansas City has to get talked about here. Is that Minnesota's not the divisional leader? They've been playing a little bit lukewarm in the last couple of weeks, and so this was a chance for Kansas City to definitively say we have surpassed Minnesota at this point, and we are ready to make a push to Cleveland. But they failed, and they have to take a knock for that. Hey, you know me, man. I'm all about cheering them on. They're your plucky pick to be a divisional winner and a playoff contender in the American League this year. We talk about it every week because it does feel like it's fairly real. At a record of 35-23, they're still plus 12. This is a solid playoff team in the American League as it sits right now, so don't stress too much. How do you feel about the lumps they took this week regardless, Dan?
Yeah, the Minnesota series hurts because it shrinks their lead over Minnesota to just 3, and there's only 3 between them and the Guardians. Things are still really tight here, but I think it kind of exposed their outfield a little bit. I've
Uh-huh.
been pretty happy with most of the infield and the top of the order.
Mm-hmm.
But the lefties, Warren, you have this rotation where Kansas City has like a lefty outfield and a righty outfield that they rotate based off of the opposing starting pitching, which makes sense. A lot of teams do that.
Yeah.
But you have the lefties really struggling, specifically like MJ Melendez and
Mm-hmm.
Kyle Isbell have both really struggled at or
Yeah.
below a 200 batting average throughout
Yeah.
this, as opposed to your righties who have been more of the fill-ins, the Garrett Hampsons and the Darian Blancos, who have been a little bit
Mm-hmm.
better. So the Royals are almost seeing this consistent improvement against righties and this little bit of a dip in the back of the order against lefties. And I think that was reflected against a lot of the starts, especially in that Minnesota series.
Mm-hmm.
So we're starting to be able to pinpoint some of these weaknesses of this staff. Obviously, the pitching has been really good.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and you could argue that the relief pitching has been a little bit high on the walks. They're a little bit high on not, or I should say, they're a little bit low on the strikeouts and a little bit high on the walks. That those are
Mm-hmm.
areas for improvement, and you're reaching a point in the season where rather than pulling from AAA, I wonder if the Royals are considering putting their foot on the gas because we've talked about how they've been exiting the rebuild these last couple years, and you do have to make that decision at some point of, okay, let's give the guys the rest of this year, get it under their feet, and then we'll make some changes for next year and we'll see how it goes. Or you say, you know what, we're doing really well, let's make a couple moves and let's see how far we can get this year, even if we're going to have to give up something that we might, like a prospect for example, that might come up in the next couple of years. I think the Royals are reaching that intersection, and a loss in a tough series against the Twins just makes that decision even harder of what's the right call.
You know what it seems like the Royals could use, Dan? They could
Brent
use a
Rooker.
I was gonna say a consistently hard hitting outfielder, right?
Outfielder. Weird.
Give me some, give me some Ward and some Fam over here too, guys. Come on.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Why
kind
not?
of what they're looking for. Melendez hasn't grown into the offensive game plan quite as much as I feel Vinny Pasquantino has. I like
Yeah.
watching Vinny Pasquantino highlights lately for these
He had a
Royals.
rough start too, so it's been great.
Yep. And he needs to, man. He coming back from injury. He needs to slot in next to Bobby Witt and be a difference maker. But anyway, Pasquantino love aside, you haven't seen the consistent output from that outfield. And Isbell, Renfro, and Velasquez have mashed a ball or two. Melendez too, from moment to moment. You would just need a little bit more, and one more piece there could be all it takes to really help this team blast off. And we could kind of be excited to think about that if you want to be. But I don't know if even with a piece or two, they catch the Guardians, because the Guardians have such a strong understanding of their identity and how they play their games right now. But I suppose the Royals will get a chance to check how they're doing, because coming up on the schedule, they will first take on the San Diego Padres. Oh, of course, at home. And then they hit the road to take on the Guardians in Cleveland, and that can be a really strong indicator of which parts of their toolkit they need to sharpen, right? Because they're in the fight, and you love to see it. Kudos to Kansas City. However, the Guardians are playing extremely strong baseball, as we'll talk on in a little bit. So should be a lot of fun. Anything more for the Royals, though? I mean, apart from the fact that we love to see them play, you have to be a little bummed they sit here in our countdown, but it's got to be deemed fair, I would think.
Yeah, it was a rougher week for the Royals, but I think they'll have a good opportunity to rebound. And man, taking a couple of games off of Cleveland would be a huge step for them. And
Yep.
also, Warren, it's worth pointing out that this next series with San Diego coming to town, we should
Yeah.
see Dylan Cease against former Padre Michael Waka. and that should be in his
Ooh.
first start against his former team. That should be a pretty good matchup. Definitely worth tuning into.
Oh, I can smell the sea, Dan, as you discuss San Diego.
Mm.
Oh, I sure do love the idea of watching a game at Petco Park. But do you love the ideas I think you might of putting the Padres next? I wonder, who sits at number 18 this week?
Warren, it's like you're reading my mind.
Ah,
I think we have to talk about the San Diego Padres.
I
Uh,
love it.
Weird week for them, I'll say. So, first started out with the Yankees coming to town and dropped the first two games before managing a pretty strong win in the last one. Great start by Estrada in that one.
Mm-hmm.
And then a 3-game series against Miami where they took the first two and dropped the last one. Kind of blowout, a 9-1 loss in that
Mm-hmm.
last game. And Warren, I feel like we're at a point with the Padres where obviously Dylan Cease has done fantastic. Luis
Mm-hmm.
Ariz has done pretty well since he stepped in there too. I
Yeah.
think I told you I was a little worried about him, about the Padres putting Luis at second base. They haven't really done that, which is great. It's worked out really well for them in that regard. But
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, I think you're right to have the Padres here. Their record is 30-29, hovering around 500.
Mm-hmm.
They just got leapfrogged by the Giants. They're kind of stagnating right now, and
Yeah.
it's hard to pinpoint any individual thing because the offensive numbers aren't too bad. It's just inconsistent, I guess I would
Right.
say.
Yeah.
And as strong as we've seen the starting pitching, especially with Dylan Cease, I mean, man, Warren, I can't imagine like if they kept Snell or if they didn't get Cease, where this team would be at because he has been
Dan,
such revelation for them.
Dan, this is the number one strikeout leader in the of all pitching staffs, right? This is the team that toppled Philadelphia at this point, and your jaw's got to be slacked a little bit that the offense isn't doing its part when you look at the talent that jumps off the pages on their roster or their depth chart, right? Of course, Luis Arias being Captain Glue Guy with a bat in his hands and certainly doing his part from game to game. Generally, you'd think that would be enough. But, the loss of Xander Bogaerts may prove to be kind of important. That was a bat that you wanted to have that you're now missing. Jake Cronenworth does his part. Machado's been scuffling, but slowly showing signs of life. Maybe Tatis has been the most missing in action at the moment, would you say?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I mean, Hassan Kim too, Warren. Like he had a really good
Yeah,
start to the year, right? He blew up in Korea,
yeah.
and maybe I shouldn't say that. He did really well in Korea, but he has really
Wow.
started to just plateau lately, and it's rough to see. I mean, some of the you know what else, Warren? The one of their trade returns from that Michael King deal when they got him was the catcher Kyle Higasoka, or I
Oh,
probably
Kyle
pronounced it wrong.
Higashioka. Sure,
Higashioka, thank you.
sure.
Kyle
No problem.
Higashioka has not made a very good transition into San Diego. And
Right.
they made a lot of moves to get him. And so they're going to give him playing time behind Campisano, but not really working out as well. So the whole bench is just a little bit lighter than what we probably like to see from a competitive team.
It's crazy. I mean, they strike out fourth least in the league, do their batters. Their average is fourth for a reason. Their OBP is at sixth, guys. Their RBIs at eighth. Their stolen bases at eighth. Like, there's plenty of the offensive superlatives coming in for this San Diego team. They're just not putting it all together to link with their above average pitching. But if you think about it, Dan, those numbers, those things I just said, they're number one in hits for crying out loud in the league. Like the number 8 in runs, like they're doing what they need to do. I think maybe they've had some bad luck in their matchups, but the paper says they could probably pull out of this as long as it doesn't start getting worse, right? So
Yeah.
maybe a down week for San Diego, but a stable team, certainly offensively. And when you have the most strikeouts in the league as a pitching staff, you're obviously doing something right there. So I wouldn't stress too much about San Diego's long-term outlook yet. They're just hitting a weird snag we can't quite appreciate at the moment. And they belong here in our rankings. The Yankees are next, and then the Marlins. One team totally ready to make it tough for them, and one team totally ready to at least play plucky, because guess what, man? I'm talking about the Marlins next. From the Pacific Sea to the Atlantic, the Marlins had a middle week, and that's still better than what they've been trending overall from week to week. I mean, last week they also kind of rose higher than we expected, but the Marlins get to sit at 17 here. They did go 3-3. First, they took 2 of 3 in Arizona. Not a good luck. One more time for those Diamondbacks. And then they did drop a series to the Padres that we just reviewed. So it seemed appropriate to put these two side by side. You got to love Josh Bell's play. That's all I can really say. Josh Bell has been really waking up and being pretty important for this crew, for those Marlins. And Jake Berger's been consistent at the plate too. They were on the road all week, so no chances for burgers to be added to the tally, which we offer, by the way. They get burgers in Miami when they get home wins, guys, if you didn't know. So an entire road week for them, and split it 50-50, which is to say, not bad, guys. Those NL West teams that they faced could have really done worse against them. And then while they do have Texas and Tampa Bay to look forward to over the next 5 games, 3 versus Texas and 2 versus Tampa, this is actually a team that can continue to ride the middle and maybe even take some steps forward this week. Miami's been doing a lot to show that they're not completely dead in the water yet, that they're not quite floaters. It's now or never. Like, they really can't take any more steps back, can they, Dan?
Totally, they cannot. And it's nice for them to have a 500 week as they aspire to get closer to 500. And this is a playoff team last year, and sure, there's a
Right.
few different pieces, but I do think they're a closer to 500 baseball team. I think I had them above the Nationals in my predictions, and I think that could still happen. We'll see how it goes the rest of the way. It's encouraging. You see guys, I call them the Jays, Warren, Jazz, Jake, Josh, and Jesus. They're all
Nice.
finally starting to lead the lineup, and be that top like they were supposed to be. They didn't need Luis to have that top of the order performing. And we're finally starting to see that, and that's resulting in a few of these wins. But man, Warren, if you asked me who I thought would be the anchor of this lineup, I would not have guessed Tim Anderson.
Yeah.
But that's what he's been. He still has 0 home runs. He has a 199 batting average. And Warren, I was looking around. I have never seen this before. He has, and I'm sure it's not the only time it's happened. I just haven't seen it. He has a slugging percentage of 219, which is less than his on base percentage
Oh,
of
yikes.
235.
Huh. That's an
And
anomaly.
it happens like rarely with guys that don't get a lot of plate appearances, but for the most part, you just don't see that. Very strange. He's struggling big time, Tim Anderson is, in Miami.
Yeah. It's proving that maybe this disgruntled employee just doesn't like his career path anymore, and he will want to find something else to do professionally, because teams are going to stop paying him to be under the brightest of lights pretty soon if he continues to play this way, regardless of the upside he once flashed when he was the star of the original, whatchamacallit, Field of Dreams game, which was such a beautiful game when he walked it off with a homer over the Yankees. If you guys didn't see that a few years ago, I mean, you look at him then and he's a star, ready to be a big focal point of a burgeoning White Sox team. And now he's with the Miami Marlins, one of the worst teams in baseball, and looking like one of its worst players. And that is depressing for those who believed in him at one point. And now, you got to expect him to find his way out of professional play eventually, unless he turns it around in a hard and focused way. A couple weeks ago, we were talking like he was capable of that. So
He's still young, so who knows?
Young enough to make bad decisions that see him way out of a career. Like, it doesn't matter. The potential could be there, but you have to want to do it, and you have to play with passion and with humility. And I have a feeling that we're not seeing much of either from Anderson overall, and he's falling to the bottom of the league and the player pool for that reason. Too bad. Tisk tisk. Be better. The Miami Marlins will need to be better to avoid being the laughingstock of the NL East, but ironically, they were among the last of the teams in the division for us to chat about. There's still actually one more. All the heavy hitters are behind us, and the Mets too, for the record. Uno Mas, when will we talk about that last team? We'll find out. Anything else on those Marlins, buddy, before we take a picture of the trophy prize and put them on the wall and move on to our next team?
Let's hope for burgers next week, man. Just hope for some burgers.
Mm, I love me some hamburgers, but Miami's starving. Let's see. We have more teams to break down. Number 16 is the last before we hit our midway point. I feel like, Dan, with only 53 minutes to go before your Mets take the field and you want to see if today's the day they reverse trends, I feel like we could do a little bit of extra speed if you want. Who do we have next?
Sure. Next is going to be the Tampa Bay Rays. And
Yeah.
they unfortunately had a kind of middling week. They
Yep.
started a 3-game series against the Royals, dropped the first 2 before recovering the
Mm-hmm.
last one to prevent the sweep.
Mm-hmm.
Then a
The,
3-game series against Oakland. So dropped the first game in that one and then recovered the next 2. So totally back and
mm-hmm.
forth for the Royals. And I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Oakland that a couple of those games were come from behind wins, late
Sure.
wins, which is pretty encouraging for this Rays group. And they're trying to get more out of their bullpen by stretching guys and spreading them out a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have like a solid closer at this point, Warren. It was Pete Fairbanks to start the year. They kind of did a rotation, and Fairbanks has done pretty well this past week, so he will probably get most of those opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
But they have 6 different pitchers who have registered a save, which is pretty
Interesting.
encouraging. Yeah,
Yeah.
so they're kind of taking a committee approach with that, which has actually helped the numbers. They don't have very good relief pitching numbers compared to their starting pitchings, but it is improving over the month of May. So there's that to look forward to.
Yeah.
Additionally, it's worth pointing out that the bottom of the lineup has been relatively good, and we're actually seeing some of the stars struggle on this team. So it's Randy Arozarena. Warren, he's a
Mm-hmm.
159 batting average, struggled massively. And then
Mm-hmm.
ever since Brandon Lau has come back and rejoined the team, he's only hitting 180. And those are
Mm-hmm.
key parts of their lineup that are just holes right in the middle. The
Yeah.
only hitter that they have on the team that's hitting oh, I'm sorry. They do not have a single hitter on the team hitting over 300,
Right.
and Isaac Paredes is leading the team at this point with a 295 batting average. But Warren, no one else is even close to that. 262 is Richie Palacios. That's the highest. Everybody else is below that. And the only other offensive category that's really standing out to me, we mentioned last week, Jose Caballero is still swiping bags.
Mm-hmm.
He's up to 20 at this point. But I see these pieces of the offense, and it's not like these other teams were, and it's not like it's the bottom of the lineup. It's not like it's just the
Mm-hmm.
rookies. Like Johnny DeLuca has really struggled, but he is not even at 150 plate appearances yet. So we're going to give him some time, right? But to see guys like Randy and Brandon struggle as much as they have, more than they have, even if we've seen in the postseason the last couple of years,
Yeah.
this is just going to continue to sink the Rays when they're hovering around 500 and could still be competitive.
Of course, there's some things that they need to inject into this team who kind of have some superlatives on the positive side and then some on the negative. One that I want to highlight, Dan, about the negative aspect of their play, they are 28th in home runs. They are losing that stat only to Miami, burgers aside, and Chicago. That's the White Sox specifically, who just hemorrhage power batters at this point. Everybody's injured, or our Tommy Pham, and Tommy Pham cannot a whole team outplay. That being said, Tampa at 28th needs to inject some power, and you can be excited whenever a Lau or a Low or an Arozarena does get a hold of a ball these days because it's just not as common. Last year, they were living by the lawn ball during that meteoric performance. It makes you wonder how they can go from one extreme so far to the other without losing so many of their offensive pieces. Kind of interesting. I'm curious if there was a coaching change, over the year, and I just didn't pay attention to it because that's the kind of thing that points to such a dramatic shift. But yes, Tampa is a team that we joke quite a bit, lacks an identity as either a quality play team or a poor team. And while they have the top 10 numbers in strikeouts, they're ninth in that figure. They strike out the ninth most batters in the league. Like, you got to take that as a good sign to their pitching staff. There's just enough holes on both the pitching and the offensive side to see this leaking results. Leaking results. This seems like a team that's checking out who they have. To your point, Looking at all these guys who've gotten saves, which they are, like, I think the number 3 team in the league in saves. Like, they're checking out who they have and are building kits for future years. We've talked about how this team feels like they're aware that they're one step behind. Maybe they're more aware than we realize while they continue to shuffle all these guys around to see what they can do. But regardless of how successful it tends to be with the sheer number of guys getting saves, if you guys followed along with me on that. So, again, this is yet one more week we get to say we're not sure what Tampa is capable of because they have so much potential and have only capitalized on a fraction of it. And maybe that's where they are going to be. And we might just have to respect that they're taking this year off of truly competing. And maybe they're not going to get any more clear. Maybe they just ride the middle for a little while longer. I don't see them as buyers or sellers, Dan. I just don't. They just ride the pipeline and see how it goes next year, is how I feel this is flowing. Yet it's still good enough to get a just above midpoint spot on our rankings. Surprising is definitely a word for it. But Dan, unless you have something else to say on the Rays, we've reached the middle of our countdown. And you know who lives in the middle. You know who guards the middle. You know who is the definition of meh and mid. I'm talking, of course, of the perennial mid team for our countdown, the Toronto Blue Jays. How about we slot them in here for the middle this week? Another AL East team that is still trying to determine just how much they value themselves, Dan, at this stage. They sit at 4-3 for the week, so they do deserve to have their nose above the Rays, I feel, having a more winning week for a change. They lost 3 against the Detroit Tigers, who, again, are plucky and strange, another one of those question mark teams, to say the least. And then they sweep the White Sox to lick their wounds and go, don't worry, we're not that bad. But the Blue Jays sit in their bird bath, primming their feathers and trying to look like winners, and they're covered in scabs and they're bleeding a little bit. Their Warriors not quite ready for the fight ahead. They have Pittsburgh on the horizon, and then the Orioles coming up. So more bird battles to look forward to. And when there's 4 of those games, by the way, I believe that is at home, you have to still be afraid that the Orioles are ready to fly right by these guys. Anything encouraging about Toronto's play from your viewpoint this week, Dan? Because while they did win more than they lost, you had to hope they would have a better performance against a Detroit team that is hit or miss as a quality team in themselves. And you can really not get too much from a Chicago White Sox sweep at this stage of the season.
Definitely. I don't think that they deserve any extra credit for that.
No.
And I'm a little disappointed they only managed 1 win against Detroit for some of the reasons you mentioned, especially that barnstormer at the end of the series there. So this is a team that's confusing to me, Warren. Like they rank 8th in the league in on base percentage, right? So they get on base.
Sure.
So I don't understand why they're 25th in runs, 23rd in home runs, and 21st in stolen bases. Like, you're getting on base, so try and slug, so steal a base, like slow ball contact. Any sort of contact will get you one of those categories, and they're not getting any of them. It just seems like, well, I don't want to speculate too much. The facts are showing us that Dalton Varsho is the home run leader of this team, the only one with double digits. Warren, you got Vladdy, you got Bo, we got Justin Turner, George Springer, Kevin Kiermaier, even in his day, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I messed that up. Falefa.
It's okay. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. What a name, right?
Absolutely. But like
IKF.
Where is the home run power going, Warren? And at the very least, why are they not being more aggressive with stolen bags? At this point, the leader on the team is George Springer, 35-year-old George Springer.
Oh my God.
7 stolen bags, dude. I don't understand it. Like, what are they doing? I'm starting to question the manager at this point.
There it is.
I feel like I'm seeing the pieces for a run, but inconsistency just everywhere. And I know we were all ready to throw players and start trading guys away and things like that, but maybe this team needs a new manager. Maybe they need a midseason manager firing, get
Mhm.
some new direction for this team. I
Yeah.
don't think they've had anyone different than Schneider for a few years. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they
Not
need a little bit of a shakeup because the pieces are there, Warren. You can see it.
right. Yeah. Absolutely. Dan, a great call from you. Truly a great call. I really would love that to be a theme that Toronto hears, is that maybe they need a coaching change. We have talked in the past about how this manager, um, Dan Schneider, feels a little bit out of touch with the direction of his team, especially when they do work so hard to make playoffs. He tends to be a bad playoff thought thinker. Like he just doesn't make good decisions, And maybe it's just time because you're right, Dan. The talent's there, but the focus is not. The identity is constantly in question. They're low on the list of stolen base teams, to your point, when you say George Springer's pushing himself to get those bags. It's almost like they're not even thinking about it. It's not something that's part of the kit that they built into this Toronto team. They're just a team that expects it to be put together, but may not be able to coach their way to that. And it's a problem. If they don't want to flush this whole lineup, like we've been warning is on the horizon, if things don't get obviously better, you might have to look at the coaching and take one last swing and get rid of them. And you might have to do it shortly here because the trade deadline's coming up. You don't necessarily want your new coach to have to deal with whatever the front office decides to do before then. You know what I mean? So red alert. Yeah, some big things could come from Toronto. I love your take on getting a new brain at the helm. I don't need to spend too much more time discussing why this team is disappointing because we've basically been doing it for the last 10 weeks in a row. So, Toronto, you did enough to survive a chopping block this week, but your head is definitely on the cutting board. This is big. What are you going to do? That's it. That's where we can leave Toronto. It's bad, They're gone from being the gatekeepers of the playoff race in my mind to being lucky to be here. They're not out of the race, but changes have to be made if they're going to stay in it. They have to. So, they're at the precipice of some big culture questions being answered. Number 14, evenly will take us into the lower half of our rankings, Dan. You, my friend, have the evens for a change. Who you got next on our countdown?
Yeah, man, we've been moving along pretty good. Our pace is good, but I think we should get this next team out of the way so then we can just run through the next. It's got to be the Seattle Mariners. And
Whoa.
I think it's
Interesting.
could have argued for them being a little bit higher, but I think you could argue for them to be lower too, Warren. I'm curious on
Mm-hmm.
your take. They had
Okay.
a tough week. They went 4-3, a 3-game series against the Nationals. They dropped the first
Mhm.
two and managed to win in the last one to prevent the sweep. And then a
Yeah, you
4-game
remember how
series.
I was just gonna say, you
Okay.
remember how grumpy I was for our recording last week because I
Yes.
knew what was really happening to those Mariners guys. Yeah, it's true. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, but they opened a 4-game series with Houston against Houston with 3 wins, so a little 4-win streak right there.
Yep.
Before getting Verlandered in the last game, was it Warren or
I I think Verlander was a part of the third game,
the
which
third game?
honestly we had no business winning, if you want me to say that, because I feel like Houston was just sitting there daring us to lose the game and or win it. I really do. Like there's some strange tension around Seattle's baseball team. But did you do all of the leaning in you wanted to do, Dan?
Well, just
Um,
the one other thing I wanted to say, Warren, is that when I look
yeah.
at this team, I see some of those close wins they got over Seattle, some of the offensive outbursts, and I'm torn, right? Like these are the type of wins that you want to see from a playoff team. Those late wins, those close wins, the ones where, like you said, it looks like they had no business winning the game, but they
Right.
did. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you want to see from your team. So, do you feel like, well, I guess I have two questions for you, Warren. Do you feel like your team is overachieving and managing wins like that or meeting expectations by grinding out those ones? Because I know you've talked about how many wins you expect for them in the year. And then on the other side of things, as of now, only the White Sox have less hits than the Mariners, and they continue to lead
Mhm.
the lead in strikeouts. So I got to ask you, as we reach about a third of the way through the season here now, Warren, are
Mhm.
you putting the blame for this? Because I think you have to say it's blame at this point On the hitting coach or on the batters? And do you feel like it can be fixed with adjustments, or is this like we need major surgery in here to get some change?
Fun questions, Dan. So, guys, you might as well buckle up for a few minute discussion about Seattle. I've done a good job not hinting it with other teams around today. So now the floodgates can open. Let's take this in baby bites. First thing I want to say about this week is shout out to Dom Canzone's outfield defense. When Dom Canzone became a Mariner last year as part of the Paul Sewald trade, a lot of stuff was said about him. He's still very impulsive at the plate. He swings at a lot of pitches I wouldn't. And when he runs into them, though, he does sometimes hit them out. So I love watching Dom Canzone figure out what he can be on the offensive end. What nobody thought he could be was an effective outfielder defensively. And what I noticed in so many games this week is a diving Dom Canzone making good catch and web gym catch after web gym catch. And I love that. Thank you for that, Dom Canzone. I wanted to say something positive first, because now I'm going to say the offense is embarrassing. Okay? The offense is embarrassing. We have sat at the worst strikeout number since the start of the season, and I will say it one more time, where we sit now at 594 strikeouts, Dan. Oof is right. So I have to talk about the fact that one of two things is happening here, okay? I'm going to go the more likely route right now and say maybe we are just terrible at the plate. We're unfocused. We are impulsive. We swing at pitches that are going to be ground balls straight to the shortstop for a throwout, right? Or we're going to swing at pitches that are outside the zone and in ways that no one can do a whole lot with except on a sheer outlier, right? Like we're just chasing and chasing and chasing. What the hell, right? Not effective baseball play. But we do it over and over again. We slam our heads into the wall over and over again. It's embarrassing. So if they're doing it because they stink, it is absolutely the fault of a hitting coach who's new to this team since last season, who was brought in with the focus of limiting strikeouts, says the entire coaching staff. So why are you failing this blatantly, this obviously, and this badly? Like, Polanco was brought in to be a disciplined bat, and he's not behaved that way. Garver was brought in to be a disciplined bat, and sure, I think he's one of the better examples of that, but the results aren't coming from him. You look at guys like, sure, Cal swings out of his shoes, and when he hits one, he clobbers it, but can we swing out of our shoes a little less? Dom Canzone, like I said, looks like Bambi at the plate. Still like, ooh, I wonder if I can do this. So let's just put it this way. My sweetheart has been listening to our show as she always does in the background. She brought me this, Dan. Breaking news from Seattle land. Hitting coach Brant Brown has been relieved of his duties.
Way.
Excuse me. Bench coach. It's bench coach Brant Brown relieved of his duties. So coaching things are happening. Parted ways with offensive coordinator Brent Brown. It's done. Seattle's aware of the fact.
You just willed it into existence, dude. That's amazing.
Right here, breaking news on our show. We're not late. We're early. Thank you, my sweet.
Yeah.
Brant Brown is the scapegoat taking the fall for Seattle Mariners offensive woes, and thank God it's somebody. Because the other thing that I was going to say, Dan, is this is a massive conspiracy theory. I was going to go the conspiracy theory route and tell you that all these late wins for the Seattle Mariners, winning in late stages of the game, prove that we're actually kind of good at hitting. We just whiff for the sake of whiffing so that we can say we're the worst strikeout team in the history of the league, yet we'll maybe stumble into the playoffs, right? Or the other side of the conspiracy theory I was kicking around is, hey, what's our record, Dan? Come on now. What's our record?
30-27.
Yes, we are actually at this moment 31 out of our 58 games are victories. What's 31 divided by 58, everybody who is aware of the trend here? Just shy of 54 freaking percent. What would happen if we had won one more game against Washington if we had miraculously swept Houston and sat at 32 out of 58 wins.
But that's what you said last year, Warren, though. It's the same if you had won one more game.
What I'm saying is that if we had won one more game this week, we would have been at 55% winning percentage. And what number does Seattle want? We want 54, baby. So that we could sneak into those playoffs, but not be a favorite and catch everybody off guard. I was leaning towards the conspiracy theory because I cannot look at a team like this and realize that it's okay that they're that bad at the plate. There's no excuse. There is too much talent on this team for them to be that bad at the plate, and I mean it. It's not subjective, it's objective. These are professional baseball players, okay? They cannot look like a freaking little league team at the plate the entire season and expect success. So God bless Brant Brown. Go down in flames. You don't belong making the decisions you've made to put us in this position if the goal was to limit strikeouts, and we are doing this. So, thank you, everybody. That was a lot at once, but Seattle is aware that they need to be better at the plate. And if we get even 20% better at the plate, everybody's going to have to start respecting us at last, because that's really all that's missing. The pitching gives us a chance to win in almost every single game. Thank you, pitching. Thank you, Bryce Miller. Thank you, Brian Wu. Thank you, Logan Gilbert, Luis Castillo, and George Kirby. Thank you, guys.
The bullpen, though, Warren, has
The
actually been
bullpens,
great.
They've been even better. Yeah. You know, Andres Munoz is the flamethrower everybody wants at the back end of their bullpen. This guy is pitching like the Stone Cold Steve Austin of the league. Thank you very much. He's stunning them left and right. Grateful for what we can do on the mound, and I love watching it. But man, oh man, as soon as this offense looks 20% better, the rest of the league now understands that we can be a threat, and we will be a threat. I just pray we've made enough changes right now to make that happen, and we don't waste this opportunity to be the best team in the American League West as I predicted we would be. Dan, did I say too much yet? I feel like I did. But before I let us truly move away, I do want to say we had a trade this week. The trades have begun. We did trade away Blake Hunt, who was a backup catcher we picked up and has been playing in the minors. We picked him up in a trade earlier this year, and I'm surprised to see us move on from him because he's basically a starting catcher quality player that was performing in the minors for us. And honestly, I don't know why we didn't have him up and Zebi Savala down, is my thought. So seeing him go, I think, is a tad premature, but what we brought in was a Mike Bachman, a reliever for the Baltimore Orioles, who stands quite tree-like on the mound like my friend Logan Gilbert does. The guy's huge. And he was instrumental to getting that big win against the Justin Verlander Game 3 team in Houston. Like, he pitched us out of that scenario to win that really weird and awkward, devoid of offense kind of game. So Bachman's a great pickup. More tools for our bullpen that need them. If you guys haven't heard, Matt Brash, our slider specialist, will not return to the team this year as he goes, I think, his second Tommy John surgery. I'll have to look at the official real scenario for his elbow, but the point is we won't have him. Greg Santos is due back any day now in July, we would think, is kind of the late term expectation, and Greg Santos is terrifying. You do not want him to join Andres Munoz in our bullpen. So, like, we're set up. We've got what we need. We just need better offense. And honestly, that's the best place for us to be when you look at the talent on the team that just needs to figure it the frick out, right? They just need to figure it out. But when Julio, Cal, Rayleigh, Rojas, France, Crawford, when they do, look out. We're going to be okay. I'm warning you. And I'm grateful for that I feel that way. But, you know, the pitching's got to stay where it's at. And we need whoever replaces Brant Brown to actually enact change. That'd be great. Thank you. I'm losing my voice about this, guys. I swear, I'm aware. I love my Mariner baseball, but it needs to be better at the plate. And I can't wait to watch it happen because that's going to be a fun and organic excitement for sure. All right, Dan. Thank you. Thank you so much. Any questions about my Mariners, Dan?
Nah, man, I hope that that change works for you. I mean, like, even though, they're not in the top 10 necessarily for us, the Mariners are in first place with all of these offensive struggles. So you can only imagine what their ceiling is if the offense does get going.
And
So
and
there's just
and that
hope.
that's what I'm saying, dude. I read all these reporters who talk like the Mariners are a glass champion atop this. What they need to give credit where credit's due. We're where we're at despite the offense, okay?
Right.
We knew the pitching was going to be like this. We did. Everybody in the league was like, just watch out for the Mariners on basis of pitching.
We were
So,
panicking in the first couple weeks when we didn't see it right away, but now
sure,
we are.
sure. So, yeah, it's just Brant Brown should be embarrassed for whatever the hell he did to the brains of the Seattle offense. And I hope whatever job he gets puts him in a better light for his own career path, because I wish nothing super ill on anybody. But what he did as an offensive coordinator for the Seattle team is an embarrassment. And I'm excited for change because the right players are in the right position to get better, and they are good. They are a good team. They just need to figure it out at the plate. Ugh. Oh, and Dan, why the heck don't we bunt? Why don't we bunt? You look at that game in the third one, the Verlander one, the Bachman one, whatever you want to call it. We had the opportunity to bunt for a win. I don't care if it's ungentlemanly and we don't. It's the Astros, guys. Bunt for a win. I'm so upset. Sorry.
That's your hitting coach, dude. That's your hitting coach telling them what to do in that situation.
Bunt for a win. Just take the win. What are you doing? If we hadn't won that game, Dan, you think I'm angry now, everybody? Nah. Oh man, I would have been so mad. Okay. Whew, I'm not an angry guy typically, but I am passionate about my Mariners, and I'm passionate that the offense needs to get better, and I apologize. I apologize to everybody who is waiting for it and giggling at me right now because it is embarrassing, and I'm not deaf to that. I'm done. I need to get off my soapbox. Thank you, Dan, for putting my team there. I could spend the next 13 picks deciding, clearing my aura, if you will, guys. I need to clear my aura. We got two teams here that are still in the mediocre tier, and both only went 3-2. I guess it all comes down to who won maybe against better teams and, who may have had this tougher schedule. So I guess I might need to give credit where credit is due to our defending champion Texas Rangers and put them at number 13. Lucky number 13. They had, as I just mentioned, a middling week, having dropped 2 of 3, to the Minnesota Twins. Another team ready to remind everybody that they're more prepared to be champions in the American League than our own defending champions of the world. But Minnesota did make them an example before they then took 2 out of 2 from the Arizona Diamondbacks in a rematch of last year's World Series. They looked obviously better. So you have to think that's a trend in the positive direction. Honestly, is it enough to make them who vault from the lower part of our rankings into this high? Maybe not. Maybe I could have nerfed them a little sooner in our conversation, but you got to at least hang your hat on the positive trend we saw against Arizona and think that maybe Texas is going to get some stability back from this momentum. You hope so. You just kind of hope so, because they haven't been the world champs we expected. They get Miami next, and then they get Detroit. These are two teams they can definitely build some momentum off of, though we haven't talked about Detroit yet. I'm aware. We'll get there. Don't worry. Dan, how do you feel about the champs now that we've totally let the team that's leading them have it?
Yeah, the offense is clearly not reaching the levels it did last year. None of the guys are. And Seager is getting back on track. He is getting his home run rates up. He's at 13 right now, with Garcia right behind him at 12. That's coming for those guys. You expect to see that. But yeah, we're just not seeing the consistency from the rest of the offense. Wyatt Langford just rejoined the team. We'll see how he does recovering and trying to get settled in there, because he's currently at a 228 batting average, only 1 home run. If he continues to struggle, he might be sent down if they get a little bit healthier. But then there's the bullpen side of things too, Warren, and a lot of these games we saw last week in that Minnesota series. they gave up a lot of runs late in the game. And, David Robertson and Kirby Yates have been pretty locked down in the eighth and ninth. Um,
Mhm.
but they're letting up too much before that. A lot of home runs, 25th in the league among relief
Mhm.
pitchers and home runs allowed.
Mhm.
Leclerc has kind of settled into that seventh, eighth inning role, Warren. We talked about how he was struggling in the closing role. He still
Mhm.
hasn't found it. So he's like a key piece of that bullpen that really needs to get going. And overall, I see Texas struggling, and we see it this past week, right? Texas struggling against 500 teams like
Right.
Minnesota, and then taking advantage of under 500 teams like Arizona. And I think you can extrapolate that backwards for their last several series, Warren. This is a team that's
Mhm.
taking advantage of the little dogs and just getting beat up on by the big dogs. They're 9-13 against opponents that are over 500. So I think the Rangers are good to have up here, but I'm honestly not as impressed with them after this week.
Mm. Well, how much of that is just health and where it sits right now? Are we thinking that this is the final form of the Rangers? Because we can't possibly. Most of the
Well,
pieces,
Eovaldi's back
okay, but they have more on the way back from the pitching rotation before the end of the year, of course. You have
in
to think they're
theory.
holding out for that.
In theory, I mean,
Yeah.
Degrom. I know that they're hoping that he comes back and he's a 0 ERA guy, but like me, like I am 100% skeptical that he will even pitch in a game this year if he does
Mm.
come back.
Mhm.
And then there's the John Gray side of things. And John Gray should be coming back relatively soon, but I think
Mm.
he's had multiple stints already this year, so that's a little concerning. And then I believe the next one is Tyler Mahle, who should be coming back from again Tommy Johns, which could get delayed. And then you
Right.
have Max Scherzer, who's getting to the point where he's approaching 40 years old, coming off
Yeah.
of back surgery at the end of last year. So, like, I hear what you're saying. I just think that for the Rangers, it's a little pie in the sky to be like, oh, we're going to get a brand new rotation in July, guys, and everything will be fine. Well, it usually doesn't work out that way. But you're right. We'll see what happens.
Boy, when you put it that way, and we look at all of the 5 teams having been discussed from the AL West this week, at this point, you look around and go, "Will the real contender please stand up?" And I know as a Seattle fan, I might be poking the bear a little bit. I just know that if we don't turn offense around, we will fall. But what team is gonna take the spot? When you look at a Houston team barely figuring it out, a Texas team praying to figure it out, a Angels team like literally throwing darts at the board to put a lineup on the field, and Oakland, I don't need to say anything. The bottom line is there's no one here ready to be a strong representative on at this moment. So everybody has a redemption story arc in this division, and with only 3 teams reasonably, you can say 4 if Los Angeles gets out of their straitjacket. You could say anyone can march into this and win this division at least at this second. But man, are we going to be excited about the team that comes out of here? They need to clean it up. They all need to clean it up. And Texas, you're making it sound like, Dan, is one of the ones least likely to do so. Are you fearing that?
Yeah, I'm lacking faith in the team right now. I'm not seeing it on the field, Warren. I'm just not seeing it.
Man, well, there it is. Texas, you are ranked higher, more obviously, for your rank of or your rate of play this week, right? You're ranked higher, but you're on thin ice. And in a couple of or a couple of weeks, I'll be asking if our defending world champions should be buyers or sellers. Man, you may be disappointed in what you hear. We'll find out. Dano, number 12. Keep it even. We have but one more mediocre team, and then everybody else here had winning records. And no one was perfect this week. We can really have an interesting top 12 to appreciate. I know who I would pick here based off the integrity of our model. Are you going to fall in line, or are you going to just mess with everything again? Chaos Ball from Dan. I forgot. I forgot about Chaos Ball.
Love the chaos. I love the chaos. I'm still sticking with that quality. So it is going
Okay.
to be the Pittsburgh Pirates. I think you were thinking it, Warren.
Yeah, I
And
think that's the right team to go here.
yeah, they had a 3-game series against Atlanta and they managed 2 wins in the first 2 games. And winning the first game 11-5, which when you put up 11 runs on
Yup.
those Braves, that's something to take note of, right? And then
Heck yeah.
a 2-game series with Detroit where they split. lost the first one, won the second one. That one was interesting. Warren, it was a doubleheader. And in the first game, the Pirates sent out Skeens. They won that game 8-0. Skeens was fantastic.
Wow.
And then in the second game of the doubleheader, they were playing the Tigers. The Tigers sent out Scooball, and Scooball just shut them down. I think I reversed those. I think it was Scooball in the first game and Skeens in the second.
Can I just go on record and tell you one of the most fun days you could possibly have at the ballpark to watch a Detroit and Pittsburgh doubleheader, and they both get beautiful haymakers on each other.
Yeah.
Like, what a fun day at the park. And mind you, of course, well, no, I was going to say it was in PNC, but it wasn't. It was in Detroit. Too bad. What a beautiful park that would have been to watch such a cool game. But yeah, great day of baseball there. Not necessarily for what you can read from either team, but an interesting 2-game series that turned into a one day series, right? And a lot of quality. Go ahead. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I mean, the pitching of Skeens is definitely delivering, and that's great to see. But it's the offense. They're living and dying by the offense in all these games, even the ones where the pitching is giving them a chance to stay in it.
Yeah.
And overall, this team is now 25th in the league in average, on base percentage, and OPS. So, I mean, I want to take a second and realize that this was a top 10 team throughout the first probably 3 weeks of the season. We've seen a pretty drastic curve downward for this team. And it's a little concerning. We have a couple series coming up, 3 against Toronto and 3 against the Dodgers. Not super optimistic about those series with the offense that we've seen from them so far. So the Pirates are in a good position right now, but still kind of teetering on the edge for me, Warren. I'm happy to have them up here, and I'm afraid they might be sinking in the future.
Sure, I can understand that. I mean, but pitching wise, they are set up with an exciting rotation. We won't need to repeat that because it's been the focus of a couple of weeks in a row from you and I. Let's talk about the offense and the fact that they do seem sus, right? As the kids like to say, a little sus. But if they put it together, much like Seattle, if they put it together, the talent is on the paper. It feels that way for me. I find Brian Reynolds capable. I find O'Neal Cruz a bat of the future for the league, an Ellie De La Cruz, Julio Rodriguez, Juan Soto-esque young gun of the future is an O'Neal Cruz, right? Connor Joe is a great glue guy in the same vein as a Stephen Kwan type, except you might even see more pop from Connor Joe. Andrew McCutchen is the veteran presence so many teams would appreciate to have, who can, you think, like you said last week, show signs of putting it all together once he gets going. Jared Triolo, Edward Olivares, Key Brian Hayes, Jack Sulowinski, Rowdy Telez, like Michael A. Taylor, yada, yada, yada. You say the lineup and you almost want to have them on your MLB The Show game, right? Like, this isn't on paper a lineup that says we can't do it. I just don't feel that way. So sure, maybe right now they're trending downward, but they're a jolt in the arm away from doing enough to play for this division, right? I'm not saying it's going to happen, but in a world where Milwaukee may not be sustainable, Cincinnati might have too many question marks. You look at Chicago Cubs being the strong one, really, and the Cardinals. What? The Cardinals? Where? No, we haven't talked about them yet today. Pittsburgh still got a chance. And this batting lineup, if they can get their heads out of their booties, they'll be okay. I can see that future. So let's see if it happens. It's their question marks are there, and I get it. But it's an interesting time to watch Pittsburgh baseball. And I'm stoked for the future because I do think we are maybe 2 or 3 years from this team being a perennial contender in this division. And that's not something often said, I'm sure. But
if they don't sell anyone.
Right. If they don't let some of these young rookie and exciting pieces eat the big market money that will come their way at some point. So let's hope that's not the case for me, because I just want to see winning baseball in Pittsburgh. And you guys know that. I'm just a sucker for black and yellow. What the heck? I don't know what to say. And pirates are just cool. Who hasn't dressed up as a pirate at Halloween? I'm watching you. See, Everybody here has. All right, guys, let's keep going. It is running out of time before the Mets take the field, and I want to make sure Dan gets to believe they might win the game before they give up enough runs. Yeah,
A little bit.
I
Though.
admit.
We got this, dude. We can burn through these last few.
Okay, here we go, guys. 11 now. All of these are winning teams. Let's just start from the bottom of the teams that belong here. Um, Dan, did you hear? Somebody let the ghosts out again.
Oh no!
Coors Field is paying dividends for these Rockies again this week as they shock not one but two playoff contenders with series wins. And listen, about as reliable of divisional leaders as there is in our league, took losses to the Colorado Rockies this week. We're talking about the Phillies and we're talking about the Guardians. Wow. Dan, you've said it before. Coors Field can make anything happen for the Rockies, and it really came to pass this week. I mean, sure, they weren't perfect, but if they were, you would think, man, there's something in the water, right? There's somebody pulling strings here. It's cool that at least Philadelphia and Cleveland got wins on these Rockies, but not enough to win the series against them. Talk to me about the Ghosts of Coors Field. How did they get out this time?
Man, I'm glad you have the Rockies here, first of all, because I wouldn't want them any
Sure.
higher.
Yeah,
And
agreed.
you're absolutely right. The expectation for this team is to slug at home. When they're home at Coors, they should be outslugging most other teams in the league. And honestly, Warren, if there were two teams, I would not expect them to outslug. It's probably Philadelphia and Cleveland. So
Right.
it's amazing, but this is what we need. The only bat that I'm not happy with over this little good stretch that they've had is Chris Bryant. Still not popping
Mhm.
off, Warren. I've seen a lot of the other guys get going, but Chris Bryant is not. And the outslugging the other teams is what's getting them these wins because, man, especially at Coors, but just in general, their starters and their bullpen continue to sink. They're now both starters and bullpen dead last in ERA, WHIP,
Ugh,
and hits per nine. The
yeah.
bullpen is additionally last in walks per nine, and the starters are last in Ks per nine. And I'm not trying to pile on too much, but they're all of those stats are getting worse over time.
Mhm.
But you're right, Warren. They slugged their way to a couple great series wins this week, and they're going to be returning home after a short trip to LA. So maybe they can have another good week next week.
I've noticed that when we go on the air and say something's going to happen, usually the opposite does.
Yes.
The ghosts of Colorado weren't supposed to get out again, right? So maybe, Dan, I'll reverse fate a little bit on you and ask you, Dan, 4-2 this week for the Colorado Rockies. Is this sustainable?
No, absolutely not. This is the third week in a row we've seen them go up, down, and I think it won't be the last.
No, but hey, good for them for making it count in Coors Field. I think we should go, dude. I don't know. I need to go see some Colorado Rockies baseball because I wish I'd been there for this week of content from them, right? It would have been a great week to be in Coors Field. God bless you, Denver fans, guys. God bless you guys. I mean it. Up next, number 10, keeping it even Steven, my guy. Dan, you're doing those evens, and you get the honor of naming the top 10 team in the league. This should be a good one.
Deserving to be 10, but we're not going to go any higher. We're going to do the Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah, I think
because,
another good pick from Dan.
Yeah, dude, a sweep of the Dodgers. We talked about the Dodgers' struggles, and I don't credit a lot of their failing at the bottom of the lineup. We talked about all that already, but it's still impressive. Bottom line, the Reds took 3 out of 3 from the Dodgers, and that deserves a top 10 spot at a minimum. But then they had a 3-game series against their division rival, Cardinals, Warren, and they won the first game and then dropped the last 2. So kind of there's another tale of two cities for you right there. And luckily, TJ Frito has rejoined the team, and we do see the offense improving a little bit. It's going to take him some time. He's been out for quite a while, so we'll see how long it takes. But man, Warren, I'm really disappointed with these games against St. Louis. It's these divisional matchups are so important, and they have 3 coming up against Chicago. So the Reds have been ranked pretty low. They're still about 8 games below 500. With TJ back now, this is really going to tell a story. If they can manage to win against Chicago, that's going to give them much better positioning and maybe some confidence in these divisional matchups. And we've talked about how Chicago continues to struggle in those
Yep.
divisional matchups. So it should be an interesting week for Cincinnati. See if they can improve even more.
That's what they specialize in, it seems. The Reds do catch the teams that are good off guard. That is something that they're doing, and they run on them. And they may no longer be the number one team in the league in stolen bases. The team that we'll discuss next is, by the way. But this Cincinnati team is playing their own very speedy version of chaos ball in Cincy, and it's working against those teams that are not, well, ready for them, right? But it's kind of a niche way to win right now. Like the Cincinnati Reds are just playing their meta, but their meta is just not enough to be winning consistently. But you said it yourself there, Dan. The keyword is confidence. And I was watching the fact that TJ Fradel is back. He was having a press conference with his buddy Jake Fraley prior to yesterday's game, and they were doing do you remember the Key and Peele sketches where Barack Obama would have his like anger translator? There was a bit of that
Yeah.
tete-a-tete going on. Yeah, there's a little bit of that charisma, that fun between EJ and Jake Fraley that make me think that's what this team could really benefit from, is that swagger, that personal confidence, that faith that it will be okay, that they're working through a season that may have its challenges right now, but that they have faith in whom they are as a squad and belief in their chemistry. That can go a long way. And that really was what carried them and made them so exciting near the stretch of the end of last season. They could still have that run in them, metaphorically and literally. They literally could run their way back into this. It's just a matter of making every team feel uncomfortable against you, making every team feel the stress of how you'll play them, where the speed will come in, where the power will come in. One surprising source of power this past week, especially in that Dodgers series, guys, was Jonathan India. We've heard a lot about how this guy is underwhelmed, and he's been a perennial trade chip for the Cincinnati Reds for the last couple of years since being an National League Rookie of the Year in his debut, I think 3 seasons ago now. Well, he had a grand slam for them and a couple of key at-bats that really helped Jonathan shine through in this week's content that went well for the Reds. And you got to bank on performances like that to help them climb out of this. They're not out of the running, and we know they're interesting. We say this every week. They got some very interesting wins that they can hopefully build some momentum off of and learn about themselves through. But the time is running out on the Reds when you say to figure it out. And that is a perfect place to leave them. Figuring it out is the next step for this next team, too. One that I'm excited to highlight because, yeah, I watched a lot of them over the last week, and they're winning with those base running habits that have put them atop the league in that statistic. We're talking about the Washington Nationals, guys. Surprise, surprise, they made it into the top 9 this week. They did win a series 2-1 against my Seattle Mariners, and they did win 3 of 4 against Atlanta, a result that nobody expected, as the starting pitching rotation for this team has really started to balance out and make some headway against some of the more interesting lineups in the league. And by the way, this May has not been a good one for our heralded star of the Nationals, CJ Abrams. So they've gotten a lot of productivity this last several series without him really being the guy for all the love I gave him a few weeks ago. So he's looking forward to the calendar turning to June, especially if Washington's playing with the momentum they're playing with now. What do you think, man? This is a team, Dan, at 26-29 that is just as in a playoff race as a Toronto Blue Jay team at this point. Look how that happens. So what do you take of the Nationals right now?
Yeah, I credit a lot of the success the Nationals are seeing right now to their bullpen. Their bullpen's been excellent. It's keeping them in games late. And you talked about some of the offensive side of things. You know, Lane Thomas is coming off the IL right now, so a little bit more speed. This team's been great about stealing bags, and he's going to help them with that. So I honestly, Warren, kind of shocked this week to put series wins against Seattle and Atlanta.
Right.
Huge credit to the Nationals. And honestly, for a lot of those younger players that you mentioned, and Lane Thomas included in that, it's series and games like this that like keeps you in that conversation and just allows you to build a little bit of momentum. I think with the series that they have coming up, they could take advantage of these teams, and we could see
Mm-hmm.
Washington going a little bit of a run. They're right behind 500. And I think
Mm-hmm.
everyone is still underestimating. We mentioned before how Colorado was a trap game. Well, I think Washington is the new trap team on the calendar, Warren. People see
Yeah.
Washington coming through, and I don't think they're taking them seriously. And at home or on the road, they're showing up.
I definitely want to jump right on that, man. I was watching, of course, as you know, game one, especially against them for Seattle. Seattle was up there swinging the bat very casually, like they knew they were going to beat this team. George Kirby was throwing his strikes like he knew they weren't going to do what they could do against him. And he made a mistake and left a ball right over the plate. And I'm sorry, guys. I think it was Garcia. I think it was Garcia who served up a homer. And that was the beginning of the end of the idea of winning that game for Seattle. And that's the exact Ron mentality for any team to have against any of their opponents, but especially Washington right now. This is the team that's learned a lot of great lessons from like Cincinnati, who I would say they're emulating, because why else would you start stealing bags on this clip the way that they have? um they're figuring it out, and if you are not careful, Washington will figure you out too. Oof. Interesting
Yeah.
team. Interesting team. Love it. Just so I can get you again to your Mets game before they start losing, I will continue us on to our next team. I think it is time we talk about these Detroit Tigers. 100% at 4-2, and now the 8th spot of our countdown. They've had an upper week, not matching what they've had a few weeks. All I'm trying to say is they jumped up. We've been waiting for them to show us who they are, and right now they look like a winner when you win 3 games out of 4 from Toronto, who really needed a little bit more of that series, as we've talked about. And Pittsburgh having that really interesting split on a Skeens day. That's just a good overall week for this Detroit team that has needed to show their backbone, right? We've talked about, and I alluded to, how they're a kind of like a Seattle team in that their pitching is strong, their offense is inconsistent. It's still arguably more consistent than ours, but that being said, it hasn't gotten them as many wins. They sit at 27-28. They are a bubble playoff team. They haven't played always like it, but right now they're treading water enough to be a little bit intimidated by the Tigers. Dan, tell me what you think.
Yeah, they had a good week, but the offense for Detroit still leaves so much to be desired, and you want to see improvement.
Thanks, Dan. Look at that. Yeah, they're higher in the charts, Warren, but they still stink with a bat in their hands. Thanks. Way to pop
I
my
just
balloon.
It's a good week, dude, but I just remember how young this team is, and
Okay.
I'm keeping in mind, like you mentioned, they are a bubble team, but I compare them to a team like Cleveland, for example. You were
Oh,
going back and forth between Cleveland and Detroit,
yeah.
and I feel like Cleveland has a lot of that grit and experience that's showing up for a lot of their veteran players,
Yeah.
allowing some, they don't have as many, but some of the younger players to
Yeah.
kind of not feel as much pressure. And I think Detroit, like we've talked about, it's Canna and it's Baez, and then it's everybody else under 25. So it's a lot of pressure on those guys. And it seems like maybe this is an opportunity for them to break out of that. Skubal gave them that gem, and they were able to score 8 runs in that game against Pittsburgh. That's the kind of game
Sure.
that'll break you out of that. The only other thing I want to say, Rowan, is that the Detroit City Connects came out, and they look super cool. I don't know if you got a chance to see them. I think there's
Yeah.
some slick looking jerseys.
I don't like the word Detroit on the cap if I can. That's a little too the Pistons for me if you watch basketball. I
Oh,
don't know,
sure.
just but I do love the dark blue with the light blue track marks running down the
Yeah.
center. I know everybody's doing City Connect content as we're starting to see the last, by the way, of those uniforms finally get released. We've seen Toronto, we've seen St. Louis's recently. We're going to see Minnesota's, and I think that might be the last of the
Dodgers, too.
wave. Dodgers second, the second design is
Yes.
coming. So yeah, Dan and I don't seem like it, but we like baseball fashion. We like sports fashion, actually. So I'm definitely hungry to do an hour on just those jerseys with some visual aids, Dan. I would love to record that whenever you're ready. But Detroit's, I'm gonna put it. Yeah, I think it's a good look. It's a good look, and you want them to have a good look because they're trying to embrace a new era. Miggy Cabrera just retired, right? They're still trying to find their next star. And I promise, if it's not Tariq Skubal on the mound, it's Kerry Carpenter with a bat in his hands. I love that kid. He's a consistently hard-hitting outfielder. I want one. I want a Kerry Carpenter right now. Okay. I know consistent is loosely used, but I do like me my Kerry Carpenter. Riley Green is maybe the better outfielder with a bat in his hands for the Detroit Tigers after all. But I just think we have a better shot at grabbing that young gun Carpenter. I like that kid. Blah 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 blah. Kudos to Mark Canha, who's arguably having the best career or year of his career, being kind of the de facto other guy in Detroit. He's playing well, but Spencer Torkelson's been more of a liability than he has been an offensive firepower. How do you feel about that? Are they bummed to see where he's been?
Yeah, they are, but you're kind of torn between sending him down and letting him figure it out there, or just leaving him up. I mean, it's major league pitching. You could send him down and he could hit 400, but what's the point if he
Mhm.
comes back up and he's still struggling? So they're going to give him enough time to try and figure it out, but it only goes on for so long.
Yeah, he's a big question mark right at the moment, and they're relying on other young guys like Colt Keith to get better. I mean, and Gio Urshela, for his credit, you mentioned wanting to have another veteran bat in there doing something of magnitude. He hit his first home run for this team, I believe, just yesterday, and it was an incredibly important three-run homer, excuse me. So if we could see Gio Urshela step into a bigger role for this team, it could help a lot. But he's coming off that hip injury he had with the Angels that ended his year prematurely last year. You have to wonder if he's capable of the consistency. If he is, that would be huge for them. So let's see if he hits more dingers as the season progresses. But Detroit, you're very much another one of those strange bubble teams for us, right? Very, very in line with the Toronto, very in line with the Boston, very in line with the St. Louis. Um, Welcome, however, to a better week than you've had recently. Enjoy it. Good luck having another one. Who you got next, Dan?
That was my pick, so this one's yours.
Well, only if you must. I was hoping that I wouldn't have to do this again, but I will go ahead and submit the Giants next. Yes, I know they're a little bit hotter than some of the other teams left on the board, but I still am thinking of the sustainability here and imagining it to be a little less reliable in San Francisco than some of the teams left on the board otherwise. And I know one of them is St. Louis, so I bet Dan's jaw is dropping a little bit as I navigated to my notes instead of looking at his charming and well chiseled face. But San Francisco at 4-2 got one of those series wins against the Mets. They did give up the Mets one win of the week after all. And then
Thanks.
you're welcome. I think they're here off the strength of their victory over Philadelphia 2-1. Dropping one game to, yes, the dominant Phillies. However, winning two is very impressive. Winning 8-4 and then winning on the other side of the spectrum 1-0 in those is even more impressive. So San Francisco is doing everything they can to say they can arrive in this National League race for playoff consideration. They've worked really, really hard to look that way, but you look around the roster and it's a bunch of nobodies who've replaced all the pieces that they expected to be in these scenarios, with maybe the one notable exception being Matt Chapman still chopping it up in the middle of the lineup. But Solaire's in trouble. We've had Slater and Hu Lee and like everybody, right? Really dinged up and struggling. Do you think San Francisco's sustainable, Dan? How do you feel at them at the 8th spot? Or rather,
Man,
the 7th spot, lucky number 7.
I've been taking heat from you all year, Warren, about picking the Giants as a playoff team after their real slow start. but they're
It's a little
over
bit.
500 now. They're
Yeah.
over 500 now. They're 10-3 over their last 2 weeks, Warren. That is pretty impressive in my mind. And honestly, 4 of those
Yeah.
games were extra innings. And of their 3 losses over that time, 2 of them came in the final at bat of the game. So they
Wow.
are right there in it. And honestly, I probably would have had the Giants a little higher if you didn't take them here. But it's
Wow.
all even more impressive to me because you mentioned some of the injuries. In addition to Slater and Hooley, we also had Conforto, Ahmed, Murphy. Lamonte Wade Jr. was just put on the IL, and Blake Snell is still struggling to figure out where he put his talent.
Luciano
But
also, he's been great for them, but Luciano's in trouble. I mean, Matos, I think
yeah,
Matos has been the hero of this team that we haven't yet mentioned a lot on our show.
and some of the younger guys you start talking about, like Brett Wisely's another one, Patrick Bailey, like these guys who are stepping in and getting it done. And then at the front of the rotation, like obviously we know about Logan Webb. Kyle Harrison has provided a good 1-2 punch for that San Francisco lineup, and they're
Yep.
giving some more rest to the bullpen, which they needed. So San
Mhm.
Francisco is, you asked if it's sustainable. I don't know if this level of play is sustainable, but I think we've been seeing a worse San Francisco team than what they really are. I think we're starting to see a better picture of what they are. Is that leapfrogging, Arizona and San Diego and remaining in second place the rest of the year like they are now? I don't know, but I can tell you that I think we're getting a better picture of what the team can be. It's just a question of when these guys come back, are they going to regress to what they were before? And if that
Mhm.
happens, like, what do you do? Do you bench the vets and keep the kids in if they're winning?
Well, I think that's the fascinating, fun, and energizing story here is the vets couldn't do it, and some of the young and exciting Jun Hoon Lee, for example. And then the young guns, the undertow come up and they're pulling stronger and playing with passion and playing with giant pride, and you want pride in this team. You want to get all the positive energy flowing. And while you could be excited certain guys come back, if they don't work, don't make them work. You know what I mean? Keep the bats that are hot and the chemistry that's gelling and let the Giants cook. And I love me some Oracle Park and I love me some black and orange color schemes and I love me some Dodger rivalry. I'm not sitting here pooping on the San Francisco Giants as much this season because I don't want to see them succeed. I just don't like some of the decisions they've carried out on some of their veteran players and how they definitely do not put, I would say, player morale first, right? Culture is a little spotty, but right now they're winning, and if the players are motivated to keep that going, ride the hot bats and good and make more power to you. Let the tide change. Let us make that division as interesting as we wanted it to be walking into this season. Let the Padres, Giants, Diamondbacks, and Dodgers be battling it out as hard as we expected them to be. It's good stuff. And kudos, of course, to Jordan Hicks, who continues to look like such the best kept secret at a starting pitching position after spending the rest of his career as a reliever to this point. It's been one of the best decisions for San Francisco that we could have conceived for them. And then that's awesome to see that gamble pay off. Will they continue to be hot against the Yankees? A huge test is their next series. 3 games at home with the Bronx Bombers will be a great test and a fantastic weekend series. We hope you're tuning in for that one. Then it's all about a battle with the Diamondbacks. Can they continue to prove they're several steps ahead at this point? San Francisco's looking good. So good on you, Dan. Your crystal ball reading may not be as off kilter as I was implying by dogging these Giants these last couple of weeks, but oh my god, there's another team you love oh so dearly for the National League playoff race that we haven't talked about today yet either. Could they be your next pick as we move now into our
Dude,
final couple spots, dude? We got 6 left.
we're finally at the risers, man. And I'll be honest, I would have had that last team in here and this team out, but you kind of forced my hand here, Warren. So our first riser is going to be the St. Louis Cardinals,
Yeah, I
the
hear ya.
Redbirds.
Another team that you wanted to fit into the playoff race faster than I did, and another team blossoming at this point of the season. So good on you, Dan. You've eyed the talent that needed maybe a slower start, but now is starting to find themselves. Talk to me about the identity of the St. Louis Cardinals this week, because it's a cool story.
Yeah, this little surge is coming at a great time because they played 2 games against the Cubs. They won both of them. They had one of those games postponed, which isn't going to be made up for a few months. So it turned a 3-game
Yeah.
series into 2. Then
Yeah.
another 3-game series against the Reds. That Reds team that just swept through LA. They dropped the
Mm-hmm.
first game and they won the next 2 to go 4-1 on the week. Only lost 1 game.
Yep.
Very impressive. And this is happening while William Contreras has been on the IL for about 3 weeks now. Lars Nootbaar was just put on the IL today,
Uh,
Warren. Yeah,
okay.
that's going to hurt him a little bit. But the
Yeah.
encouraging thing is the entire offense has truly stepped up. And Mason Wynn is the one that stands out to me. He's got his batting average over 300 now.
Mm-hmm.
And you finally see Nolan Gorman has got the first double digit home run mark on the team at 10. It's all
Yep.
starting to click. Paul Goldschmidt had a fantastic week, Warren, finally got on the
Yep.
board.
Yep.
All this stuff is clicking. And take note, Warren, take note. Lance Lynn.
Uh-huh.
Lance Lynn is second only to Sonny Gray on the team in strikeouts and ERA. And yeah, he did take the loss this week, but but
Dan,
still.
you can hold Lance Lynn over my head all you want, as long as Kyle Gibson, okay, isn't the answer at this
Oh,
bullpen. I'm especially happy. But yeah, Lance Lynn's been up and down, up and down, up and down. He'll continue to be, but he's paying dividends. I get it for the Cardinals in this run. Cool. I'll wave your flag for you, whatever you want. But
they're rising,
Philadelphia,
dude.
they are. They are. Can they rise through Philadelphia? That's the weekend series they get to look forward to in Philly. So that's tough. And then they get to be the next team to stand up against those Astros. May they put their boots to their throats, fire truck the Astros. And I'm cheering for St. Louis momentum to continue to go in the positive direction, because they have not looked great, and they haven't felt great, and they haven't smelled great. And now all of a sudden they're playing better baseball, and you kind of want to cheer it on. Just like the Giants, it's cool to see teams that are rising up a little later than expected, but looking consistently much better. Like, it doesn't look like smoke in the flash in the pan, if you will. Like, both the Giants and the Cardinals could very well be sustainable to an extent. We'll find out how true that could be as the week rolls on. Good call on the Cardinals. I believe they belonged in our risers more than the Tigers and Giants. So this works for me. Who else deserves to be up here? Some familiar names for sure. Probably no real surprises left, guys. It's just which of these, I'm going to call them badass teams. I don't mind calling them that this week, are going to reign supreme. I think at this point it's time to continue to highlight the Brewers here, and they'll take the 5th spot, because an up and down team, an up and down team, an up and down team, but man, are they not just the toughest team in Major League Baseball when you look at them from that perspective? We continue, and so do the pundits, to discuss how pitching is leaking out of the Milwaukee organization and becoming a real fear factor for them. But the offense continues to swing like no one's business. Whether you're Contreras or Churio or Hoskins, the different difference makers on offense keep going on. I mean, Bryce Terrain continues to be a contender for top stolen base numbers in the league. There's so much coming well for the Milwaukee offense. It's just so encouraging. One of my favorite teams to watch right now, because their games are just dynamic, and they had an incredible heavyweight battle with the Chicago Cubs that they won 3 of the 4 chances from. They also took out a Boston team that is strong enough to brag over a victory with. How do you feel, man? The Brewers, last week they were down, this week they're up. We probably can guess where they'll be next week after they're, well, hang on, they got the White Sox and the Phillies next, so could very well be a middle of the ground. We'll see. The Brewers strike again, man. Here they are at the top.
Yeah, you're right. And Warren, it could have been a sweep against Chicago if it wasn't for that extra inning game. I mean, it
You're
really
right.
came that close to being a 6-1 week, which would have been unreal. But
Mm-hmm.
you're right, the offense will not slow down. I mean, Reese Hoskins is still nursing a hammy, Warren, so he's not even been in the picture recently. They
Good
are
point.
still top 5 in on-base percentage, OPS, runs, stolen bases. They're 6th in average and 7th in
Oh,
home runs.
it's Christian Yelich, whose name I should have dropped, because he's come back and played really well for them
Yeah,
too. Very key this week, especially. So thank you.
definitely.
True.
But the one side of things that's a little confusing for me is the rotation. I mean, obviously, Freddie Peralta's been great, and Trevor McGill has been excellent in the closing role. Now Joe Ross
Mhm.
is coming in healthy, but they have almost a full rotation on the injured list at this point.
Yeah.
So, the team's doing well, and it makes me think if they were fully healthy, Warren, like they're already in first place, this is a team that they lost their general manager and their manager entering into this year. We talked about how they might not be able to achieve the same level of win rate that they did last year if maybe
Oh
they're not
yeah.
getting as much out of the team. But it seems like they are, man. I don't know about you. I'm looking at the team and thinking, oh man, they could be better if they get healthier down the stretch here. And
Mm-hmm.
we've seen under Craig Counsell the Brewers be so efficient in the regular season, but kind of outperform how good they are and then do nothing and fall on their face in the playoffs, right? Craig Counsell is
Mm-hmm.
gone, but Warren, I'm still getting a lot of those same feelings. I keep seeing the Brewers kind of outperform my expectations, take
Mm-hmm.
advantage of these other teams, and I just can't help but think, are we seeing the same story again? What, is this going to be a Brewers team that's not going to load up before the deadline, win the division, and then lose in the first round?
Well, I don't know, man. I think they're better than that. I do. I
Yeah.
think that the entire history of what we're seeing in this season, this has been the team that's shocked, I believe, everybody the most to be as good as they are. And when the offense is running it past the pitching challenges as well as they have been, you got to think that they're in the market for every pitching asset they can nab, and I don't know why you would bet against them right at the moment. I don't know why you would bet against them at the moment in a playoff series, because they're beating the teams that are toughest and fellow playoff contenders. They're just playing well. It's great to see for Milwaukee fans, because no one, and I mean no one, thought it would look this cool to be a Brewer at this stage of the season. It is a massive overachievement. And even though they do have their down weeks, it's that humanity that makes them even more enjoyable to watch, because when they bounce right back and keep going to the other side of the trends, it just shows that they're learning, they're adapting, and they're counterpunching. And boy, if that's not the name of the game for the marathon that is the baseball season, I don't know what is. So watch Brewer baseball. It is what the season's all about right at the moment. One of my favorite teams, for sure, to watch. Four spot. Four great teams. And they all have been looming at the forefront of our thoughts for the last several weeks now. Tough to pick one, Dan. It really is for me to put one above the other. But I think I'll
Well, it's
go
a good thing you
ahead.
don't have to, Warren, because it's my turn.
Dan, you're so mean. Fine, go.
I'll take the pressure off your head, dude. Like the NL
Stick to
teams
the
are all
format.
off the board. It's
Yeah.
only AL teams, so I get it. You're stuck in the middle here on these ones. These are all your
I don't
wheelhouse.
know how I'm going to navigate your choice next. Pull the
For
rug out from under
me,
my feet. Who do you got?
dude, it's got to be the Cleveland Guardians here, and it's
Ooh,
really just because
okay.
of the strength of schedule that they're not any higher. They did
Yeah.
sweep the Los Angeles Angels, but we talked about how the Angels have been struggling.
Yep.
And then a 3-game series against Colorado at Colorado, we talked about that. They only managed to take one game. It was a slugout, 13-7 in that win.
Yeah.
The offense has been working in their favor. Stephen Kwan is just activated for this next series, Warren, against Washington. So he's going to be coming back and help them surge up a little bit forward.
Yeah.
And then
Love
David
Stephen
Fry.
Kwan.
Dude, him
Sorry.
coming back is only going to be great. But David Fry this past week, Warren, he's got his batting average up to 353. I mean,
Ooh.
that's where Quan was before he got hurt.
Yeah,
Unbelievable. And then, of course, we already know like Jose Ramirez and Josh Naylor with 16 and 15 home runs, respectively, absolutely pacing the league. And this all happening while they have the best bullpen in the league, Warren, at a 2.54 ERA. Everything's clicking in the right spots for Cleveland. Coming up, they got 3 games against Washington and 3 against division rival KC. This could be another strong week for them. And right now, they're approaching 18 games over 500. It looks like that might balloon up a little bit more. The Cleveland just keeps on rising, dude. I think you were really right to pick them at the start of the year. And I remember you teetering back and forth between Cleveland and Detroit. And I was right there with you. And I got to be honest, I was leaning towards Detroit, but you made the right call. Cleveland has looked really impressive.
there's just something in my gut that said, the pitching could be as good as it was a few years ago. That Stephen Kwan is an incredibly awesome glue guy to have on your lineup, and he's good in the defensive end. But, how can you really bank against a Jose Ramirez when you look at a Detroit team that doesn't have a star of that caliber jumping off the page? Because I tell you, Javier Baez ain't it, right? Jose Ramirez is playing as everything Cleveland needs him to be, and he's making the whole team better because they're empowered to do what they can do. And you're seeing young bats, no names, contributing on the level like David Fry and like Will Brennan still jumps out at me. The list is actually kind of lengthy. Your Freemans and your Manzardos, like these guys are all doing what they need to do when they need to do it. They're focused, they know who they are, and they are playing winning baseball intelligently. That's great. It's great to see, but the turnaround is just nuts. Of course, I couldn't have expected to be this dominant. I really didn't. But they're doing it off of everybody contributing, rotating the hot bat, and the pitching taking an unusual model from what I expected. There's not a whole lot of American League teams doing the opener format and then relying on a bullpen to really do the heavy lifting, but it's excelling for Cleveland. It's extremely cool, and not a whole lot of teams have been able to adapt to them yet. So it's a great story, and they could balloon some more, you're right, with Washington and then another test against Kansas City. Look for that series to be just as entertaining this week as it was last week. That heavyweight battle is going to be entertaining all the way through the end of the season. The matchups between, again, the Royals and these Guardians. But not quite to be written off are the Twins. And the Twins were the top team in our countdown a couple of weeks ago with a perfect week, the first to muster one this season. And while this week wasn't perfect at 5-2, they got some wins over teams that they really needed to do, right? They needed to beat Texas 2-1 to make the world champions, lose sleep over them, continue to push them down. And then 3 of 4 against Kansas City is a shot. It's a shot taken, and it's a resounding message that Minnesota is not a glass cannon, that while they have had their injury issues and will continue to do so because it's Minnesota, built into their fabric is a certain level of toughness we shouldn't downplay either. Their offense is stable, and their pitching, while not quite on the same level as they were last year, isn't a problem yet. So, gotta love where Minnesota's at. They're getting ready to take on Houston and New York this week. So, a chance to continue to hurt the Astros. Great. And then a great test with New York, who I think beat them up last time they had the opportunity to make eye contact with them. New York was one of the first teams that kind of slowed down that hot streak they had. This is another chance to maybe, just maybe, let their momentum win out because they'll probably carry some from Houston. It just seems likely. How do you feel about Minnesota, Dan?
Yeah, everything's really going right for them right now. And I mean, I think I was waiting for the bottom to drop out on this team, especially with a couple of these series, Texas and KC, are no slouch, but they
Right.
really showed out. It's been very impressive. I think at this point, Manuel Margot is essentially spending more time on the bench than he is in the starting lineup, and that's
Mm-hmm.
probably for the best since he's only been slashing at a 208 average.
There's a reason why the Rays were ready to move on from him, right?
Yeah, I think that was the right call. And, you know, as far as you mentioned the injury side of things, Royce is still healing up. We will say, like, knock on wood, Warren, that the position player wise, it's just Royce right now. Everybody else has been pretty healthy, which is almost uncharacteristic of the Twins. And I'm sure just
Yeah.
getting all that whole lineup some consistency for a little while has helped on this recent little surge
I
that they've
still want to
had
see
going.
more of Byron Buxton, if you don't mind. He's only
Of
played in
course.
39 games, so, But
Right.
if anybody's going to be injured on this squad, it's Byron Buxton.
Yes, exactly. But
Yeah.
yeah, another thing to shout out really is the bullpen. One of their closers that they've used, or I suppose he's been really more the setup guy, but he's able to close a few of those games because he's got 5 saves. Is
Hmm.
Griffin Jacks has done really well for this team, Warren. He's got 33 strikeouts and 24 innings pitched. The dude is a flamethrower. So something to watch for out there. They're really getting a great performance from the bullpen. And did I mention Joe Ryan? I don't think I did. I'm
Not yet, no,
well,
but
I
please.
wanted yeah, I wanted to mention Joe Ryan because he was somebody I don't know about you, Warren, he really was not on my radar at all going
Uh-huh.
into this year. He only had about a year and a half of service time. Through 11 starts, he's got a 2.96 ERA, 73 strikeouts through
Hmm.
67 innings pitched.
Whoa,
Kinda
73?
yeah, he's hit the scene, dude. This is probably a rotation that we expected Chris Paddock to kind of step into and maybe be one of our ERA leaders, but no, it's been
Yeah.
Joe Ryan. He's been very impressive. So cool to see some of the younger guys on this Twins team stepping up and keeping them competitive. It's impressive.
We talk about San Diego being a surprise as the best strikeout team in the league pitching wise. Same Philadelphia's been doing it all year. Number 3 now. Number 3 are the Twins. Who saw that? Nobody. Are you paying attention, everybody out there? The Twins can pitch. And that was their hallmark last year. That's why I teased they were like the 2023 version of the 2022 Mariners who got into those playoffs. I know I like dropping that whenever I can, but it's true. Minnesota team can pitch. They also limit walks. They're number 2 in that factor. So this is a team that fills up the strike zone. And as long as they can fill up the box score with their bats, they have every reason to believe they are set up to do well as they continue on. Can they quiet the Houston offense? Can they quiet the Bronx offense, who has the most home runs in the league? Do those Bombers? So those are the questions that will need to be answered for Minnesota to continue to fly high this upcoming week. But they are doing so much better than it looked like they were going to earlier on, just a couple weeks ago, right? They've just been that they're like the Cardinals, right at the moment, like the Giants, but maybe a little bit further ahead. They are figured themselves out, and if they can stay healthy, the Twins will be a tough out. And you gotta love these central divisions, man. They were the most boring ones on paper, but are they fire or what right at the moment? You
Both of them.
gotta both of them. Both of them are quality divisions that almost anyone can win still, except for the White Sox. Okay. Um, good stuff. I like Minnesota sitting here, and at number 2, Dan, you have the honor of telling me who I get to talk about to close the day.
This
Who are
never
you?
happens.
I know, but thank you, Chicago White Sox, for being a black hole. It makes it fun because now I really don't know who Dan's going to make me talk about to end our show. We
Well,
do
Warren, I
improv.
think
I was just going to tell everybody we actually improvise this. I don't know if you guys know this, but this
yeah,
conversation
this is
we
not planned.
we don't pre-order our teams. We kind of have an idea. But we make it up on the spot based off suggestions from the great or terrible play of these baseball teams. Improvise your way into spot number 2, Dan.
Yeah, I think might be hard for you to talk about either of these teams because they're probably a rival in the American League for you. But you know what? I'm gonna just look at both of them. I think I know who I'd rather have second and who I'd rather have first. So for number 2, it's gonna be the New York Yankees.
Yeah,
A little bit of a
fair enough.
resurgence for them after a tough week the previous week, but they had 3 games against the Padres in San Diego. They took the
Yep.
first 2 of those, and then they
Yep.
swung through Anaheim and took the last 2 in a 3-game series against the Angels to go 4-2 this week. So still
Hmm.
pretty impressive. I honestly, Warren could have seen them slide a little bit more, but there's a couple encouraging things to see here. So uh, it's kind of funny to me because one of the attributes, or I should say, one of the reasons I was high on the Yankees going into this year was, well, not one of, but I suppose a couple of the ones that I was interested in. Trent Grisham was somebody I was high on. Warren, man,
Uh-huh.
has that not worked out for the Yankees at all?
No. He hasn't
He
been
is
allowed to
just
grow much.
no, not really at all. He is just fully sitting on the bench, and he's a late inning sub in if they need a pinch hitter or something like that. But here's
Wait.
the exciting stuff. What's that?
Wait. Wait, you mean there's a power hitting outfielder not getting play time? Wow, I want one of
Wow.
those.
I That's a good point, man. I could see them parting with him too, especially because
Yeah,
they got a few other options out there. But what's super exciting for me, Ward, one of my favorite players in the league. He hasn't played all year. He just rejoined the team. DJ LeMahieu is back with the
uh-huh.
Yankees. Took a
Yep.
ball off the foot, and I think he got a fracture in his foot during spring training. He's been out this
Oh,
whole entire time.
God, that
Warren, he's
hurts.
already got a couple of hits. He's only played 2
Oh,
games.
yeah.
So
Sure.
DJ is finally back in there. They got him at third right now. So that's a big boost for this team. And then just overall, obviously we got Anthony Volpe really stepping up. Obviously Soto and Judge, we know about that. But
Sure.
Anthony Volpe,
So good. So
man,
good.
283 that kid is hitting in the leadoff. I mean, that is unreal. And given a
Yep.
chance to succeed where he's at, too. This all coupled with the fact that this team is number one in the league in home runs with 81 so far. They've got 3 in the double digits, with Aaron Judge leading the way with 18. It's another thing
Mhm.
where we were really kind of giving Aaron Judge a hard time for his on base and for his lack of production, and he has exploded out of that.
Yeah,
Put all of those worries to rest. So
good.
everything's kind of clicking the right way for this team. The Yankees have a little bit of a situation with their starters. Obviously, they've had a pretty strong group since Cole went down, and Rodon, Stroman, Cortez.
Mhm.
Now, with unfortunately Clark Schmidt getting hurt, Warren, I'm sure you saw that.
Oh,
It
yeah.
doesn't
Yeah, I
look
did.
like Garrett Cole will be ready to rejoin to fill in that roster spot. So as of now, they have Cody Pody, who is a AAA pitcher that they have penciled in. He's made one start before, and he had a 1.5 ERA in his start through 6 innings. So even the guys they're penciling in to fill in for injuries and hurt are performing. This team's moving, man. They're number 2 this week.
Cody Pody. We got a baseball name alert. Cody Pody. Can he pody up some wins for them? I
Mm.
mean, the Bronx Bombers are solid, and I'm starting, whether I like it or not, to enjoy watching them play baseball. The offense is fire. I've talked about Alex Verdugo having what could be a Gold Glove year in left field for them. There's just a team that is firing on the cylinders that they need to in order to be stable amongst the top of the playoff picture for the American League. And for them, it's a breath of fresh air. This is the Yankees they wanted to be. This is the Yankees they paid to be. This is the Yankees they set themselves up to be. And now, you have to expect that this needs to be the norm for them. This is what they're going to want to establish, because why not have one of the premier baseball organizations in the league? This is what they wanted. So, we said it in the season that they paid the most to be like the strongest playoff contender they could be, that outside of the Dodgers, that is. And they're the American League Dodgers for real. They're pretty stable, they're pretty set, they're full of stars. As long as health plays well in their favor, they're showing that they have the coaching staff, the front office, and the lineup to work together to make this thing happen, at least right now. Do you see any speed bumps being strong enough to derail this team? I'm waiting for you to tell me if anything might look like an Achilles heel for New York at this moment.
So I will say after this next week of series they have Minnesota and the Dodgers on the horizon. Will be some of the toughest matchups that they've had up until this point, especially that Dodgers series. So we'll see
Yes.
how they respond there.
Yo, for sure. It's all about that super heavyweight matchup. I think you cannot circle a series as more exciting at this stage of the season than that. So let's hope you're enjoying it. That will be part of the 10-game set that we will cover when we come back. So maybe 3 series for each team, which is just going to be fun. Fun for us to cover. But before we say goodbye to this week's show. We need to crown a winner. And Dan, I couldn't thank you better. Like, I was so offended when you labeled this team as the 23rd worst team in the league last week that it really did leave a bad taste in my mouth as I was re-listening to our content, because I'm vain. I want to make sure the show sounds good, but that sounded so bad, putting this team at 23rd. Now they have risen and remain as the best team in baseball, and statistically, it really does ring true at 6-1. This team did the best. First, they swept the White Sox 4 games, which doesn't matter. We knew that would happen. But man, I mean, they couldn't even muster a win against this team, could those White Sox? And then Boston, a divisional rival. You guys know who I'm talking about here now by now. You gotta. Boston, of course, gives up 2 of 3 themselves, because who could keep pace with Gunnar Henderson, Colton Cowser, Jordan Westberg, Corbin Burns, Adley Rutschman? The Baltimore Orioles are your number 1 team in this week's anti-rankings. The best team in baseball from a winning standpoint at 35-19. Winning standpoint this week, guys. Goodness, don't crucify me. But they're just as good as we've been saying, right? The youth are swinging the bats well despite their inexperience. The veterans are providing, not that there's many of them, just enough presence to keep everything flowing well. The pitching staff is clicking. The hitting is effortless. They are priming themselves to run straight through the Rays and the Blue Jays over the course of the next 7 games, because they don't look ready. No one looks ready for Baltimore. Everybody's flying lower than these guys. Tell me I'm wrong, Dan.
You're not wrong. There's not a lot to poke holes in. You know, the rotations ERA is a team ERA of 3.03, behind only the Yankees in the American League, and tied with the Royals. So it's a really good company.
Yep.
Burns, Bradish, and Irvin all showed off this week and got dominant wins, and they've all been excellent. The only downside is, John Means just hit the IL, and that's unfortunate. He's getting elbow surgery, so he'll probably be out for a couple months. I haven't seen a time frame on him just yet. But you mentioned the younger kids, Warren. I mean, I saw that Jordan Westberg sat out the last couple games. I don't know if he was nursing anything, but he's certainly been hot this past week. Cedric Mullins is I talked about last week. I complained about the outfield. I won't go off on it a little bit more, but Santander and Cedric Mullins, I still just wish that they could, if not get their batting averages up, then see a better rotation of guys that can in there. The Baltimore team is so good, but they might need a power outfielder, Warren. I wonder if there are any teams that have one.
yeah, really.
Orioles, I'm just happy to see that after a really good year last year, it wasn't a fluke. They are not only carrying forward that momentum this year, they are proving that this is like not their ceiling. This is just their standard. This is who they are.
Yeah.
It could only go up from here. Excited to see how they maintain this the rest of the way. These teams that start off so strong, like, it's always a question of how consistent are they going to be the rest of the way? Are they going to stay healthy? Are they going to hit a skid and lose it all? So if anything, Baltimore has the most pressure on them right now because they can lose everything. Everything can go wrong. But I got to say, for a young team, they're playing cool under pressure. They're playing great games. They've won close games before, but this past week shows that they can go out there and just dominate and not even have any of these games really be close.
As a closing stat and a true underlier of Baltimore's dominance, let's talk about the slugging percentage around the league. There are 2 teams tied at 435 for the lead. Yeah, one of them is Baltimore and that youthful lineup. We could just throw that out there. The team at number 2, though, at 435, the Los Angeles Dodgers. And what did Dan and I have to say about those Dodgers when this season started, apart from their dominance? We pointed out their experience level. We pointed out their age, their pedigree, their reliability, the proof in the pudding, if you will, the proof. This Baltimore Orioles team is on par with the proof of the pudding of the veteran talent all up and down the Los Angeles Dodgers lineup, guys. It's an anomaly to see a youthful team performing to this caliber with this much confidence with the bat in their hands. The slugging means they're accurate with those swings and that the balls are falling or they're flying, one or the other. I mean, I get chills thinking about how good this Baltimore team has to be right at the moment in order to look this good. So I'm excited to see playoff baseball come from this team because they are the lock above all. I mean, even more than the Yanks, because the Yanks even could have periods where their bats miss balls, or maybe their pitching staff goes down with some injuries. They've weathered the Garrett Cole storm and all, but Baltimore has just literally not looked feasible. They just haven't. They have been so stable. It's the point where as soon as you lose 4 games out of 6 in a week, we have to put them at number 3 just to say they're not as legendarily good as we thought they were, even if it's just for a week. So, Baltimore, enjoy your top spot. We pay you back, okay, for Dan's disrespect last week. I'm sorry, Baltimore. I really am, for my co-host. I apologize. Will you continue to be near the top of the league next week? We can almost bank on it, but only time will tell. We're going to have about a 10-game hiatus, friends. One last time, if you made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for sitting through another 30-game lineup. And let us know down in the comments below, my guys and gals, if you think the Chicago White Sox have any hope of escaping the 30th spot black hole that they manifested this week. Tell us down in the comments below if at number 20, the Houston Astros are any closer to finding their way out of playoff contention. Are they the next Arizona Diamondbacks in Dan's mind? Are the Astros one day not going to be coming? Let us know down in the comments below. At number 15, how about the midpoint of our league still being the Toronto Blue Jays? Do you believe in them at all at this point? I want to know if you think they're going to figure it out. How about number 10 with the Cincinnati Reds? We've been burying them week in and week out. Did you have the Reds running into your hearts too at this stage of the season? And is it sustainable? Can they keep their legs a-churning? I'm curious. And finally, guys, are the Orange Birds inspiring you just as much as they're inspiring us when we create these countdowns? They're just playing great ball, and it's almost impossible with the experience level so many of these guys have. It's great to see. It's go watch your Orioles games now, guys. Take notes because they know how they're doing it. Friends, it's been an awesome countdown. Any parting words, Dan, before we call this trip around the bases well run?
No. You know what? I will say, Warren, that we're approaching the halfway point of the season. We're not there yet, but before the halfway point, a few of the things that we will be working on are definitely some trade deadline coverage.
Yes.
We'll do a little special before the All-Star break, and then we will look back at our predictions when we hit the halfway point of the season.
Yes.
So a few fun things coming up. It should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, not that we've necessarily done a bad job of keeping those thoughts in our mind, but maybe you guys need a special refresher on which one of us has our predictions trending better. Who do you trust more? Are you NL Dan or are you AL Dub? Can't wait to hear what y'all think. Let us know in those comments below. And speaking of comments, if you'd like to ask us a question or give us some feedback, email us at coveringOurBases@gmail.com. And be sure to check out the entire full episode that will be on YouTube every week on our channel, covering our bases, ladies and gentlemen. He's NL Dan, I'm AL Dub. Yes, it's been a wonderful week. Thank you guys for tuning in to Covering Our Bases. We will see you next time. In about 10 days, we take a trip around the bases. Go Mariners!